Chapter 541. The days of waiting were boring. For Li Tianlan, the rarest thing in life was boredom. It had been like this since he was a child. In less than 48 hours after the end of the trial day, Li Tianlan had completely stabilized his injury. With the dragon vein in his body, Li Tianlan did not feel that there was anything special about himself in his normal state. But once his body was injured, he could clearly feel that his body was getting better every minute and second. This feeling was indescribably wonderful, but in the eyes of others, it was enough to make their eyes turn red with jealousy. Even Tribulation, who had always been calm, was a little uneasy when he saw Li Tianlan's recovery speed. Tribulation was now in the same ward as Qin Shilai. Li Tianlan was peeling an apple with a fruit knife. His movements were serious and focused, but his sense of existence was completely void. Whether it was Tribulation or Qin Shilai, as long as they looked away, Li Tianlan would completely disappear from their perception. His body was surrounded by wisps of faint mist, which was the dragon vein constantly repairing his body's injury. The mist was almost invisible, but now the wisps of mist were more existent than Li Tianlan. Tribulation leaned against the bed and looked at Li Tianlan. With a somewhat complicated look in his eyes, he said, "Tianlan, you are now the most terrible assassin in the dark world." The meaning of these words from Tribulation's mouth was self-evident. He was the only assassin in the dark world today, and also the strongest assassin and killer in everyone's heart. But feeling Li Tianlan's current state, Tribulation really felt a little ashamed. Li Tianlan didn't enter the invincible realm, but his combat capability was not much worse. The most important thing was that he was in an illusory state all the time. In this state, if Li Tianlan didn't want to be discovered, even ordinary invincible realm experts couldn't find him. He could get close to anyone without revealing his aura or killing intent. When he broke out in an instant, death was coming. In this way, if Li Tianlan was lucky, he could even assassinate an invincible realm expert. If the target was an expert of the invincible realm, this was simply the peak in glory that all killers and assassins dreamed of. Qin Shilai, who was sitting not far away, nodded in agreement and said, "Indeed. It's just a method to kill. Why bother with your own position?" Li Tianlan smiled gently, cut the fruit in his hand into 2 pieces, handed them to Tribulation and Qin Shilai, and whispered, "Jiang Shangyu is coming." The room fell silent. Tribulation took a bite of the fruit thoughtfully. Qin Shilai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he did not speak. Jiang Shangyu. This name, which had always been noticed in Zhongzhou State but not closely, was now the new focus of the dark world. It wasn't because of his sudden rise in status. Instead, it was because of his ability to reach the heavens in a single bound. In one day he went from the thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm, and even to the top of the half-step invincible realm. Everyone wanted to know how he did it. Now the whole dark world was dead silent. The invincible realm experts of the major forces were either dead or injured. Under such circumstances, the thundershocking realm and the half-step invincible realm experts, especially young experts like Li Tianlan who were only half a step away from the invincible realm, suddenly became important. The rise of Jiang Shangyu scattered the light on Li Tianlan. As for Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, they were also dim now. There was even a saying in the dark world that if this generation of young people grew up, the only one who was qualified to compete with Li Tianlan for the top in the world in the future was not Wang Xingxiao or Gu Hanshan, but Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu was expected to officially arrive in Reki City at 8 o'clock tonight. Everyone wanted to know what Li Tianlan was thinking now. "Tianlan, what do you think?" After a long time, Tribulation asked calmly. "There must be something wrong with Jiang Shangyu's martial arts. I don't think he is breaking through." Li Tianlan said quietly, "It's possible for Jiang Shangyu to reach the peak of the thundershocking realm overnight, but from the initial thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm," he smiled and didn't go on. There were indeed many examples of rapid progress in martial arts, but everything had its reason. Jiang Shangyu's so-called breakthrough had no reason at all. From the peak of the thundershocking realm to the half-step invincible realm, and from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the half-step invincible realm, it seemed to be only 2 steps, but each of them was much more difficult than entering the peak of the thundershocking realm from the chi-controlling realm at the beginning. Jiang Shangyu's breakthrough this time was equivalent to a person who had never touched martial arts reaching the ordinary half-step invincible realm overnight, or even more exaggerated. This was simply impossible. His martial arts are not important now. What matters is what his arrival means. Tianlan, he is different from Qin Qingwan. At his age and the realm he shows now, there will be many people who are willing to support him at all costs to challenge your authority in Eastern Europe and the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Challenge?" Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "If I were Jiang Shangyu, I would definitely not do this, and I would even try to avoid contact with me. The so-called challenge requires strength. In this realm, I am invincible and no one will be my opponent." Marshal Li is really domineering. A clear and gentle voice suddenly sounded. The door was pushed open and Gong Sun Chi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State in white, came in. He said with a faint smile, "You and I are in the same realm now. I wonder what are the chances of Marshal Li winning against me? Or are you 100% sure to win?" Gong Sun Chi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State. Before Li Tianlan appeared, he was recognized as the #1 expert under the invincible realm in the Dark World. Even though Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the invincible realm, not many people thought that he could challenge Gong Sun Chi's position. Li Tianlan stood up and thought about it seriously. Then he smiled calmly and said, "Senior, if you want me to win, then I can win." There were several meanings in this sentence. If he thought about it carefully, it was really long-lasting and extremely smooth. Gong Sun Chi laughed and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were soft and he said, "It's really rare for you to say this kind of thing." Li Tianlan waved his hand, grabbed a chair and put it beside Gong Sun Chi. On the trial day, Gong Sun Chi, who had been strictly neutral in Zhongzhou State, and even the four spirits had always stood firmly on the side of the Snowdance Corps and ignored the Wang family of Beihai. Whether it was for the overall situation or for something else, Li Tianlan had to accept this favor. So he was willing to call Gong Sun Chi Senior. "How are your injuries?" Gong Sun Chi sat in front of Tribulation and asked. "Not bad." Tribulation bowed slightly. Even he maintained respect in front of Gong Sun Chi. 3 years ago, in the final battle of Heaven Capital, Tribulation broke out with all his strength and killed Shinichi Miyamoto, an invincible realm expert in East Island. To some extent, it was also Gong Sun Chi's help to Tribulation. Gong Sun Chi nodded, glanced at Li Tianlan and said, "The president will arrive in Reki City in 3 days." Li Tianlan understood the meaning of this sentence and said calmly, "I haven't discussed this with Marshal Uncle." "What is it?" Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan in confusion. Li Tianlan frowned and thought for a while, then said slowly, "The chaos in Eastern Europe will end with the president's visit to Reki City. That is to say, it is almost over here." Tribulation nodded. This was to be expected. The chaos in Eastern Europe had developed until now. More than 10 invincible realm experts had died, and all the major forces were leaderless. 2 of the 4 families had changed their positions, and the other 2 had been destroyed. Zhongzhou State was entrenched in Wulan State and had formed a general trend to unify Eastern Europe. After the night of trial day, the situation would gradually calm down. Li Huaqing would visit Wulan State, and the 5 countries in Eastern Europe would be completely marked with the mark of Zhongzhou State. At that time, with Wulan State and the Arctic Ocean Command as the core, the army of Zhongzhou State would sweep the whole of Eastern Europe bit by bit, and the whole situation would become extremely clear. "If there is no accident, I will return to Yuzhou with President Li Huaqing to report on my work," Li Tianlan said slowly. He looked at Tribulation and said calmly, "But we can't leave this place behind." Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan and listened silently. "So when I reported to the President and Minister Dongqing, I recommended Marshal Uncle to be the new Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Only when you are here can I rest assured and you can control the situation." Li Tianlan continued. A touch of astonishment appeared on Tribulation's face. Perhaps before he said this, no one could have thought that Li Tianlan would resign as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. The rank of marshal was secondary. What mattered was everything here. If Li Tianlan did not leave, the Snowdance Corps would not leave. With the full cooperation of Prime Minister Rieker, the full support of the Arctic Ocean Command, Rekvia's obedience, and the Qin clan as an ally, Li Tianlan's foundation in Eastern Europe could be said to be unique. As long as he stayed in Eastern Europe and developed peacefully, within 10 years, Li Tianlan would truly become a pivotal figure in Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan actually wanted to hand over such a good situation to him? Tribulation was confused for a moment and shook his head subconsciously. Everything he developed in Eastern Europe naturally belonged to Li Tianlan. But this was completely different from Li Tianlan's development here in person. "Why do you want to leave?" Tribulation asked suddenly. "After returning home, I will go to Tiannan and develop peacefully in Tiannan." Li Tianlan seemed to want to say something else, but when the words came to his mouth, he fell silent with a complicated look on his face. Tribulation's eyes trembled slightly for a moment, and he also fell silent. The situation in Eastern Europe was not bad. But after the storm was settled, Li Tianlan was in a hurry to leave. Obviously, Li Tianlan had a more important goal. What could be more important than Eastern Europe? Naturally, it would not be just Tiannan. After the trial day, the situation in Tiannan was already very clear in the eyes of those who were observant. There was the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan. There were also more than 100,000 troops in the Blood Battalion. And the tens of thousands of square kilometers of land that was completely free. All of these could belong to Li Tianlan. Compared with Eastern Europe, Tiannan was the real foundation of the emperor. All of this had been very vague before. But on the trial day, Li Tianlan's sword strike was enough to explain too many problems. Now no one thought about who lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan. There were only a few people at the peak of the invincible realm. The answer was easy to guess. The question now was why on earth that person lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan. The Purgatory of Heaven capital. Tribulation suddenly smiled with a self-deprecating smile. Li Tianlan was still silent and said nothing. "How is my sister?" Tribulation suddenly asked, and his voice became low and hoarse. "She's fine." Li Tianlan said slowly, "Rushi is with her." Tribulation closed his eyes and didn't speak for a long time. Chapter 542. In the end, Gong Sunqi broke the silence. "I have communicated with Minister Dongqing. In principle, he agrees that Black Tortoise will lead a group of terracotta army to be temporarily stationed in Reki City and return to Zhongzhou State after the situation is completely stabilized. Li Wangxing, the Black Tortoise of Zhongzhou State, could also be said to be a direct force of Li Tianlan. The achievements of the Snowdance Corps came first, and Dongqing Wudi's full support followed. Coupled with the inclination of the four spirits, the general trend had completely guaranteed Li Tianlan's foundation in Eastern Europe. As long as Tribulation was willing to stay with his status and strength as the #1 assassin in the Dark World, even if Li Tianlan left Eastern Europe, the Li family would still have absolute influence on Eastern Europe in the future. Li Tianlan looked up at Tribulation. Since Tribulation broke through in East Island more than 3 years ago, his position had become a little awkward. Today, Tribulation was the Minister of the Northeast Special Warfare Department of Zhongzhou State and also the Director of the Supervisory Council, which was equivalent to a Member of Parliament. He was transferred from the Northeast Special Warfare Department to the Commander of the Snowdance Corps. As long as he was given the title of Marshal, his position was also equivalent to that of a Member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State. It seemed to be the same, but in reality the difference was huge. After all, Sai City had been entrenched in the Northeast for many years, and its influence had long been deep-rooted. Tribulation's role in the Special Warfare Department was nothing more than icing on the cake. But once he left the Northeast, he controlled the strongest Special Warfare Battalion in Zhongzhou State. In addition, he was far away in Eastern Europe, so his real power could be said to be doubled. Li Tianlan was now the young governor of Sai City, which naturally belonged to the Li family. Once Tribulation stayed, it meant that Sai City had taken a crucial step in the battle with Kunlun City. 3 years ago, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, known as the twin pillars of Sai City, entered the Sky Academy and the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou respectively. Now, with the addition of Tribulation, the power of Sai City was gradually spreading beyond the Northeast with the addition of Li Tianlan. Such a move was slow, but it was so powerful that no one could refuse it. "I can stay." Li Tianlan and Gong Sunqi could put this matter in front of him, which was enough to show that Dongqing Wudi in the rear had gotten through all the joints and was only waiting for him to nod. "Thank you, Marshal Uncle," Li Tianlan said softly. Tribulation shook his head and suddenly seemed to think of something. He said, "So what about Jiang Shangyu?" Li Tianlan and Gong Sunqi looked at each other and said nothing. Jiang Shangyu's transfer was the most wrong thing this time. As the newly appointed Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, his position could not be changed in the near future, which meant that he would be in Eastern Europe in the near future. But the matter in Eastern Europe was over. Why did Zhongzhou State transfer him from Eastern Europe? At this time, Kunlun City had completely fallen out with Jiang Shangyu. Kunlun City did not have the power to deal with Jiang Shangyu now. Even if it did, Jiang Shangyu was in Eastern Europe. However, Kunlun City was also out of their reach. As for targeting Jiang Shan? What a joke, the title of Jiang Shan Senior Counselor was not just for show. "This matter is a little interesting," Tribulation said. Yes, from the moment Qin Xingwan died in Eastern Europe, all the timing seemed to be just right. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group pushed Jiang Shangyu, and Jiang Shangyu took advantage of the situation to make a breakthrough. He would stay away from Eastern Europe for the time being, so he fell out with Kunlun City. All this was too coincidental. Although there was no deliberate sign, all this seemed very strange. Li Tianlan said slowly, "If I'm not mistaken, the Jiang family should have turned to the southeast group, or at least to Wang Qinglei." Tribulation turned his head and glanced at Qin Shilai, who had been silent. Qin Shilai shrugged slightly and pointed up. Above the Qin clan was naturally the Lin clan. Tribulation smiled, turned to look at Li Tianlan and said, "It's okay. Even if Li Tianlan left Eastern Europe, the Snowdance Corps would not move in a short time." Tribulation held the military power, had the strong support of the Qin clan, and was in the invincible realm. It was not difficult for him to suppress Jiang Shangyu. Li Tianlan was relieved and said slowly, "In that case, we will release the news that the president will arrive in Reki City in a few days." Li Huaqing's visit to Eastern Europe had been discussed after the date of death, but the diplomatic department of Zhongzhou State had never officially issued a document. The reason was naturally very simple. After the date of death, the Snowdance Corps had a great advantage in Reki City, but the advantage was not a victory. Li Huaqing naturally wanted to make the situation more stable. After the trial day, although everything could not be said to be without suspense, there would basically not be too many problems. At this time, the Snowdance Corps naturally had to cooperate with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make Li Huaqing's visit more grand. Moreover, after the trial day, almost all the major forces were in a state of no leader. The Shadow Throne was disbanded, and King Tong was disabled. The president of the Heroes Club died in battle, and the murderous weapon was lost. Jiang Qinsong was expelled from the Jiang family of South America. Huan Kong, the lord of the fantasy world, died. Cass Rotter, the leader of the Men in Black, died. The entire Dark World was facing an unprecedented reshuffle. Now, only the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican were left in Reki City. These two forces seemed to be looking for opportunities covetously. But as long as Li Huaqing came to Eastern Europe and signed an agreement with Wulan State, presumably these two forces would also feel that the general trend was over. No matter how unwilling they were, they could only withdraw from Eastern Europe. Otherwise, what awaited them was war. Li Tianlan was silent, thinking about the gains and losses after the battle. It was not easy to win this battle. The only thing Li Tianlan could be glad about was that none of the Invincible Realm experts standing beside him had died, but that was all. There were 4 Invincible Realm experts standing beside him: Qin Shilai, Raphael, Tribulation, and Situt Sangyue. Now, all 4 of the Invincible Realm experts were seriously injured. Tribulation was the one with the lightest injury. When he pestered Paul, it could be said that he had broken out his limit. So far he was still in a state of extreme exhaustion. As for those injuries, he could barely suppress them and slowly recover. Tribulation was also the only one who could recover his combat capability in a short time. Qin Shilai's situation was a little worse than Tribulation's. He could not fight for a year and a half. Situt Sangyue's situation was a little worse than Qin Shilai's. He and Raphael were in the center of the self-explosion of the Devil Troop. The explosion of the Devil Troop was not only a devil's eye, but also the holy punishment of void absorbed by the devil eye. Such an explosion was equivalent to a head-on attack from a murderous weapon. Situt Sangyue's injury was destined to take a long time to recover. As for Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, Li Tianlan's expression was a little complicated. The brother-in-law who threw the Dark Saint's spear to him at the most critical moment of the battle and finally protected him was still in a coma. He was the strongest among them, but he was also the most seriously injured. When he woke up, not only would he need a long time to recuperate, but it would also depend on his luck whether he could recover his strength. If he was unlucky, even if Raphael was alive without the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, it would be an extremely heavy loss for the Dark Knights. Li Tianlan shook his head, suddenly stood up and said, "I'm going out for a walk." He got up and left the room. Opposite the robbery ward was a temporarily modified intensive care unit. At this moment, Raphael was lying inside, motionless. Li Tianlan stood by the window of the ward and looked at the motionless figure. After a long silence, he turned around and walked into another ward. "When I was a child. I don't remember." Dongqing Rushi's clear and melodious voice rang out in the ward. Li Tianlan walked in and looked at Situt Sangyue sitting on the bed. He nodded and said, "Auntie?" The complexity in Situt Sangyue's eyes flashed away. Then she nodded and said with a smile, "How's the situation outside?" "It's fine." Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He subconsciously avoided Situt Sangyue's gaze and whispered, "We won." "Yes, we won." Situt Sangyue muttered to herself and said softly, "It's good that we won. Dongqing Rushi stood up happily and pulled Li Tianlan to sit down beside her. The charm in her eyes and eyebrows was natural. Li Tianlan smiled and touched her hair. Dongqing Rushi relaxed and her eyes became clearer and brighter. Situt Sangyue also fell silent. No one knew whether it was intentional or not. Whether it was tribulation, Situt Sangyue, Li Tianlan, or even the entire Zhongzhou state, they all avoided a question. Zhongzhou state won the battle on trial day. Because of Li Tianlan's desperate comeback, because Li Tianlan had the sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm at that moment. But from beginning to end, no one asked Li Tianlan where the sword energy came from. Li Tianlan didn't say it either. He gently stroked Dongqing Rushi's hair and looked at her face with complicated eyes. Situt Sangyue was also looking at Li Tianlan, and her eyes were equally complicated. At the same time at Im International Airport, a special plane from Zhongzhou State landed slowly. Reki City had been in constant turmoil in recent days. After trial day, major airlines finally made up their minds and temporarily suspended flights to Im. Now the route situation was chaotic. To be on the safe side, the special plane of Jiang Shangyu, the new vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State, would land at Im International Airport, and he would be accompanied to Reki City by Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Arctic Ocean Command. People came and went at Im Airport. Cheng Huaining, with a few guards, stood in the crowd in casual clothes, and his smile looked a little fake. Obviously, he did not welcome Jiang Shangyu to Eastern Europe. The entire Snowdance Corps would not welcome him either. But this was the decision of Zhongzhou State. Even if he was reluctant, Cheng Huaining still had to go through the necessary procedures. The cabin door opened. Jiang Shangyu, who was also in casual clothes and carrying a backpack, appeared in front of the cabin door. His smile was gentle and calm, and his entire body did not have the slightest bit of aura. Coupled with his attire and extremely young face, he looked like a traveler from afar, not a soldier. Cheng Huaining was stunned for a moment, and then he waved his hand. When Jiang Shangyu saw Cheng Huaining, he was stunned. It seemed that he did not expect that Cheng Huaining would come to greet him in person. Then he quickened his pace and walked down the gangway. As soon as his feet landed, he was at least 10 meters away from Cheng Huaining. He had already reached out his hand with a smile on his face. Cheng Huaining moved forward a little. Without the slightest sign, a great force came directly from behind. The great force instantly pressed Cheng Huaining to the ground. However, the hurried roar in his ears sounded at this time. "General, be careful." A sharp sword light almost flew over Cheng Huaining's head and pierced Jiang Shangyu. The extremely condensed sword intent suddenly broke out in front of Jiang Shangyu. The space was completely shattered by this sword and it was blurry. Jiang Shangyu's smile was a little stiff. Boom. In an instant, the completely broken sword intent completely enveloped Jiang Shangyu. Countless sword energy flew wildly in the airport and destroyed the fighter plane in an instant. Cheng Huaining and several guards were instantly seriously injured. Cheng Huaining's mind was blank. This sudden sword was completely aimed at Jiang Shangyu. The most important thing was that this sword was the real invincible strike. The sword light broke out for a moment. Blood splattered and then dissipated. The airport was in chaos. Cheng Huaining, whose face was livid, stood up and looked in the direction of Jiang Shangyu. Only a backpack was still there, and Jiang Shangyu, whom he was going to greet, had disappeared. Puff. A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Cheng Huaining's mouth. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on August 20th in Eastern Europe. Before it was dark, 2 pieces of news swept through the entire dark world like a hurricane. Withdraw. Before the president of Zhongzhou State visited Reki City. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was the first to announce its withdrawal from Reki City. In less than 5 minutes, the Vatican also announced the withdrawal of all forces in Reki City. Along with this news, Jiang Shangyu, the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State, was attacked by an invincible realm expert as soon as he arrived in Im and was now missing. Chapter 543. The retreat of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was not mighty. As a new superpower in the dark world, with most of the dominators of other forces dead or seriously injured, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could be regarded as the real best in the entire dark world because of the existence of God. No one would have thought that when all the major forces had invested heavily in Reki City, the first breakthrough in the chaos in Eastern Europe, only 3 people from the Purgatory of Heaven capital had come. 3 people came. Naturally, there were 3 of them when they left. God, Daybreak, Dawn. 1 was at the peak of the invincible realm, 1 was at the invincible realm, and 1 was at the half-step invincible realm. Although the number of people was small, the lineup could be said to be extremely luxurious. The biggest advantage of having a small number of people was that it was convenient for them to retreat and move covertly. So many major events had happened in Reki City, but except for the night of the trial day, no one could detect the existence of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The biggest disadvantage of a small number of people was that without enough support, it was difficult for the Purgatory of Heaven capital to make any big moves in Reki City. So the Purgatory of Heaven capital came. So the Purgatory of Heaven capital left. He came and went in a hurry like a passerby. The small private plane gradually took off, and Reki City in his sight was gradually becoming smaller. Looking down from top to bottom, this capital of Wulan State used to be extremely prosperous and lively. Perhaps because of the constant storms in recent days, all the streets had become extremely cold. According to official statistics, after the date of death, at least 1/3 of the shopping malls in Reki City were closed, and the number of people in Reki City was reduced by nearly 3/5 in one day. Not everyone had the courage to leave this land permanently, but there were many people who chose to leave temporarily. After the trial day, more people left and more shops closed. The streets and alleys were desolate. Occasionally some people passed by, but they were all in a hurry. Although the dark world could be sure that there would be no war in Reki City, the dark clouds of war still did not dissipate. Therefore the tall buildings were still tall buildings, but at this moment they looked extremely desolate. Daybreak sat by the window and looked at Reki City, which was getting smaller and smaller, in silence. His handsome face, which could be described as beautiful or devilish, did not have any extra expression, but his eyes were incomparably deep. Such a Reki City reminded him of Yuzhou City during the Spring Festival in Zhongzhou State. It was just as prosperous. It was the same cold silence. Cold, vast, desolate, but incomparably beautiful. Reki City was really beautiful. In the eyes of every big shot in the dark world, Reki City could be regarded as a peerless beauty that could drive people crazy. Daybreak watched quietly. The plane was rising. Clouds appeared in front of him, clear and faint, misty and indistinct. He subconsciously shook his head, and for the first time his eyes showed a little regret. What? Deity sat next to Daybreak and closed his eyes to rest. He seemed to feel the change in his mood and asked aloud. It's nothing. Daybreak shook his head, hesitated, and couldn't help but ask, Your Highness, are we really going to give up Reki City? The geographical location of Wulan State was too important. If this country could fall into the hands of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the future of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which occupied East Island and Wulan State, was almost unimaginable. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, it could completely recover its vitality and be on par with the Wang family of Beihai. Now it was so easy to let it go? How could he be willing? If you haven't fought for it, how is that considered giving up? Deity said calmly. Daybreak's expression became serious. Why don't we compete? Because it's not time yet. Deity said slowly. Daybreak raised his eyebrows and subconsciously rubbed a dark ring in his hand, as if he was thinking about something. The ring spun tightly against his finger like a small shadow. There seemed to be countless tiny runes flashing in the shadow, which looked delicate and strange. Are you waiting for this? Daybreak raised the ring on his hand. Deity opened his eyes and glanced at it. There was some regret in his eyes. I can't wait. This dark ring was the murderous weapon Shadow the Ripper, which belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Shadow the Ripper was not in the hands of Deity, but had always been in the hands of Daybreak. This alone showed how stable his position in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was. It had been nearly 4 years since the final battle of Heaven capital. Shadow the Ripper had also recovered some firepower, but it would take at least a year to reach the state of fire. The chaos in Eastern Europe could not be delayed until then. But it doesn't matter much if there is one less murderous weapon. To put it bluntly, Reki City is just a breakthrough in the chaos. Li Tianlan took down Wulan State, and his credit is naturally greater than the sky. Now it seems that he has defended it. But the trial day just eliminates some forces that can't go to the end. The situation in the whole of Eastern Europe now seems clear. Who can say what the situation will be in the end? Deity said calmly, let me give you an example. For example, if Li Tianlan dies today, who will Reki City belong to now? How is this possible? Daybreak shook his head subconsciously. I heard that President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State will visit Wulan State in the near future. If everything is settled, Li Tianlan should return to Zhongzhou State with President Li Huaqing. Then, there is no next. Deity said meaningfully, it's certain that Li Tianlan wants to go back, but do you really think he can leave? Daybreak's eyes narrowed. Deity turned to look out of the window and whispered, "The final battle hasn't begun yet. Who can leave unscathed until the end?" The sound of light footsteps rang out. Dawn, who looked 70% to 80% similar to Daybreak, walked over quickly and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I just received news that Jiang Shangyu, Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, was attacked as soon as he entered IM and is now missing." He handed over the handheld computer in his hand, which was playing the news of IM International Airport. Deity laughed. He glanced at Daybreak and said blandly, "Look, I told you that he can't leave now." He looked down at the handheld computer quietly. On the computer screen, the picture of IM International Airport was playing. Deity watched it twice from beginning to end, then shook his head with a chuckle. "He's a smart man. From now on, I'm afraid that he will really open up the sky." "You mean Jiang Shangyu?" Daybreak asked. Deity nodded and said in a calm and affirmative tone, "This man is extraordinary." Daybreak looked at the picture seriously. After a long time he said slowly, "Self-directed and self-acted? Who knows?" Deity shook his head. "This is not the problem we should care about now. It's the Snowdance Corps that should have a headache." Daybreak took the handheld computer and looked at it again. He asked casually, "Where are we going now?" "Now?" Deity narrowed his eyes. At this moment he thought of a lot of things. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was a superpower that had early warning of the chaos in Eastern Europe. As early as more than 3 years ago, before the final battle of East Island began, he had been prepared for today's situation. The Samsara Palace did not let him down and developed the situation to the present point. Now the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Samsara Palace still had cooperation. And he also had cooperation with the mysterious His Majesty. Who did the Samsara Palace and the mysterious His Majesty cooperate with? What about the Wang family of Beihai? With the withdrawal of the superpowers, the general trend of the entire dark world had now completely gathered on these few superpowers. Everything was coming to an end. A video communication flashed on the screen of the handheld computer. Daybreak returned the computer to Deity, coughed dryly and said with a smile, "It's Phoenix." Deity shook his head and did not take it. "Your Highness, where are we going?" Dawn asked the same question as Daybreak. Deity was silent. After a long time he slowly said, "Go to Mormons." Everything would erupt in the northernmost city of the Snow Empire that was enveloped by the polar night. It was nearing the end and there had to be an end. Chapter 544. Li Tianlan received 2 pieces of news in the car on his way back. When the phone rang, Li Tianlan was sitting in the car with Dongqing Rushi in his arms, looking out of the window. It was windy and rainy in Reki City. But perhaps because he was about to leave, the wind and rain in the empty city made Li Tianlan feel exquisite and good. Then 2 pieces of news came one after another. The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican officially withdrew from Reki City. Before he could feel the surprise, the news that Jiang Shangyu had been attacked and disappeared in IM reached his ears. The 2 pieces of news arrived almost at the same time. It was not a great sorrow or joy, but the difference in mood was still very clear. Even Li Tianlan was stunned for a while with the phone in his hand. "What's wrong?" Dongqing Rushi's voice was lazy and soft. After the most intimate relationship, she gradually let go of some insignificant reservations. She leaned in Li Tianlan's arms, arched her little head and looked very happy. "The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican have withdrawn," Li Tianlan said. He paused and continued, "They have withdrawn from Reki City." The intelligence showed that the 2 forces had indeed left Reki City, but they had not shown any intention of leaving Eastern Europe for the time being. Obviously, even if the 2 forces gave up Wulan State, they still did not want to give up Eastern Europe. In theory, Eastern Europe was too big for any force to monopolize. Now, there were only a few forces qualified to share the cake in Eastern Europe. Snowdance Corps, the Wang family of Beihai, the Vatican, the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Other forces had been eliminated, and only 4 forces were left to divide up Eastern Europe. As long as they operated patiently, there would be gains. At this time, they suddenly gave up Wulan State, which had already been settled. There was no doubt that they wanted to find a new breakthrough. The 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State could be said to represent 1/3 of the interests of Eastern Europe. Wang Qianzong said that he wanted to take down all of Eastern Europe. At present, the possibility was very small. But if he broke through, it would not be a big problem to take down Snow Country, which was also 1/3 of the interests. For the remaining 1/3, would the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican fight or make peace? Or would they play a game for Zhongzhou State before fighting for the 1/3? Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead and suddenly felt that the whole thing had become complicated again. This is a good thing. Dongqing Rushi thought for a while and said seriously. For now it doesn't look too bad. Li Tianlan shook his head. But when the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican withdrew from Eastern Europe, Jiang Shangyu, who had just arrived in Im, was attacked and disappeared. This news was extremely sudden to everyone. Dongqing Rushi was also stunned. Now in the whole dark world, Jiang Shangyu could be said to be a young expert second only to Li Tianlan, with the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. The new Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. He had just arrived in Eastern Europe when he suddenly disappeared. Missing after being attacked. Was he caught? Or did he escape? Dongqing Rushi frowned and said hesitantly, did the Purgatory of Heaven capital or the Vatican do it? I won't. Li Tianlan shook his head with certainty. They don't have to do that. Jiang Shangyu alone can't affect the overall situation at present. For Zhongzhou State, it's a brainless provocation. If they are not satisfied with what Eastern Europe has gained in this chaos, they should target me, not Jiang Shangyu, who has not been in touch with the specific affairs of the Snowdance Corps. But if it wasn't them, who else would do it? Dongqing Rushi murmured to herself in confusion. No, it should be said that if it wasn't them, who else could do it? Li Tianlan said calmly. Dongqing Rushi froze for a moment. The situation in all of Eastern Europe, which was extremely clear but seemed to be shrouded in a layer of gauze, suddenly became clear at this moment with Li Tianlan's words. The chaos in Eastern Europe could be said to be the chaos that the Dark World had not seen in nearly 100 years. After the date of death and the trial day, the divine and holy lists had been fragmented. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu had not yet entered the Invincible Realm. But the problem was that there were not many Invincible Realm experts in the Dark World now. For the current Dark World, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu were the top combat capability. They attacked Jiang Shangyu in an instant and made him disappear. At present, only the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital had this kind of strength. If it wasn't them, who else could do it? Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. His face suddenly became a little ugly. From the looks of it so far. Dongqing Rushi's voice was clear and calm. You are the most suspicious. Li Tianlan obviously thought of this. He smiled bitterly and did not speak. Jiang Shangyu was related to the general trend, but it was not important, at least not now. So the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital would not focus on him. And Wang Tianzong was now imprisoned in the ruins of the office of the president, so it was impossible for him to take action. Now in the land of Eastern Europe, only Li Tianlan was the most suspicious person to attack Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu was not important to the general trend of the Dark World, but for the general trend of Zhongzhou State and the Snowdance Corps he was crucial. Li Tianlan had always been strong. He dared to kill Qin Qingwan in front of Wang Tianzong. Naturally, he dared to attack Jiang Shangyu as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe. This was the most likely speculation. As for whether there were any experts around Li Tianlan who could capture or even kill Jiang Shangyu in an instant, Li Tianlan's heart gradually sank. He knew that there were still such experts and they would be on his side. The key was that he didn't know how many people in the outside world knew about this. The master of Samsara Palace was still alive. This was not a simple rumor. If the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State knew this news, combined with Jiang Shangyu's disappearance, it was enough to make them think too much. Let's not talk about the master of Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting, the patriarch of the Lin clan, was still free. Li Tianlan didn't care what the outside world thought, but he cared about the attitude of the core of Zhongzhou State. Once they also thought that he had attacked Jiang Shangyu, it was tantamount to violating the rules. To put it bluntly, he had stepped on the line. At such a sensitive moment, stepping on the line naturally had to pay the price. A great price. Li Tianlan silently took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. Your Highness, this is Riker. The phone was quickly connected, and the voice of Prime Minister Riker of Wulan State sounded. Have you heard about Vice Marshal Jiang Shangyu? Li Tianlan asked directly. I've already got the news. Riker's voice was a little strange, as if he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. Even Riker's tone had changed. It could be imagined how strong the outside world's suspicion of him was now. You contact IM in the name of Wulan State. In addition, the Arctic Ocean Command will fully cooperate with your actions to find him. In any case, you must find Vice Marshal Jiang in the shortest time. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. All right, I'll arrange it right away. Seeing that Li Tianlan had no other instructions, Riker hung up the phone. Li Tianlan put down the phone, and his face had completely calmed down. The Snowdance Corps was the biggest winner so far in the chaos in Eastern Europe, but the new vice-marshal was attacked and disappeared when he just arrived in Eastern Europe. This was simply a joke, and it would make many people in Zhongzhou state question his ability to control Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan didn't care about these things. But the most important thing was that this was a black pot prepared for him and he was pinned in Eastern Europe. If Jiang Shangyu did not appear as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, he naturally could not leave Eastern Europe. Chapter 545. The army headquarters building of Zhongzhou State was solemn and majestic, quiet and solemn. There were no so-called flowers and leaves here. The square, the building and the star flag were almost eternal symbols. At first glance, the entire army headquarters building was clearly visible. It stood in the city of Yuzhou with an extremely calm and domineering air. Most of the time the army headquarters building was quiet. In this building, which was filled with the smell of iron and blood, everyone walked in a hurry. No one would make a loud noise. It seemed that everyone was in awe of something from the bottom of their hearts. But at this moment, there was a loud and angry roar in the executive minister's office on the top floor of the army headquarters building. The loud but weak voice came out of the office and spread throughout the entire floor, making the ears of some ordinary secretaries buzz. What does Li Tianlan want to do? Does he take the army headquarters and Kunlun City seriously? Does he take the overall situation seriously? Does he take Zhongzhou State seriously? He is the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but it doesn't mean that the Snowdance Corps is Li Tianlan's independent kingdom. Does he want to have troops in Eastern Europe? He's still too young. In Dongqing Wudi's office, Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State, almost slapped the table to vent his emotions. His eyes were red and he was in an extremely irritable state, almost crazy. Gu Qianchuan was seriously injured. Gu Xingyun himself was seriously injured. Kunlun City, which had temporarily lost 2 invincible realm experts, was unprecedentedly weak. Although Jiang Shangyu had fallen out with Kunlun City, his position was personally appointed by Kunlun City after all. As a result, as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe, Jiang Shangyu was attacked. He had been missing for more than 24 hours and there was still no news. In today's dark world, Li Tianlan was naturally the one who could and was the most suspicious of doing this. As long as something happened to Jiang Shangyu in Eastern Europe, as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan would be responsible. In Gu Xingyun's view, this was exactly what Li Tianlan wanted. If Jiang Shangyu could not be found, Li Tianlan could naturally stay in Eastern Europe and run Wulan State. It might be a little harsh to say that he had troops for himself, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, Li Tianlan had completely exposed his ambition to use Eastern Europe and Zhongzhou State to play with Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu's falling out with Kunlun City had already made Gu Xingyun lose face. As a result, as soon as he arrived in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan took action without any buffer. This was completely equivalent to not taking Kunlun City in his eyes at all. It was even equivalent to a hard kick in Gu Xingyun's face. How could Gu Xingyun endure it? Most importantly, the word missing was enough to stimulate his nerves. 2 days ago, Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City, went to Beijiang to pick up Gu Fenghua. As a result, he was severely injured by Qin Weibai with a mysterious power and fled. Until today, Gu Qianchuan had not come back and there was no news. Not only Jiang Shangyu but Gu Qianchuan was also missing. What was worse was that Jiang Shan, the counselor of Beijiang province, reported the news to Kunlun City unhurriedly nearly 20 hours after the incident. Jiang family Li Tianlan, this year's graduate Qin Weibai. More and more people did not take Kunlun City seriously. After the maneuver of the 2 academies, Gu Xingyun was surprised to find that the status of Kunlun City had begun to decline at a stunning speed. All the negative emotions in his heart broke out completely after the news of Jiang Shangyu's disappearance came, so that he directly rushed into Dongqing Wudi's office and roared regardless of anything. Gu Xingyun's voice was like thunder. After his hysterical outburst, he put his hands on the table, and his heavy breathing was extremely harsh. When his mood gradually calmed down, Dongqing Wudi smiled and poured a cup of tea for Gu Xingyun. He said calmly, "Your Highness, at present, no one can confirm that the disappearance of Vice-Marshal Jiang Shangyu is related to Tianlan. You don't have to be excited. Do you think this matter should be investigated?" Gu Xingyun was stunned. Looking at the smile on Dongqing Wudi's face, he suddenly realized that there was something wrong with his mentality. In his life, he wanted to strengthen Kunlun City and the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, instead of taking the elite route like the Li family before. He did a good job, but it was obviously impossible to develop a comprehensive system to compete with the army headquarters in just 20 years. Therefore, on many sensitive personnel matters, Kunlun City must reach an agreement with the army headquarters. When the former minister Chi Baitsong took office again, Gu Xingyun and Chi Baitsong had the same position. They cooperated happily and the Special Warfare Group also flourished. But now the minister of the army headquarters was Dongqing Wudi. If they wanted to reach an agreement, they needed compromise and balance. Moreover, he knew what would happen if he mentioned Li Tianlan's problem in front of Dongqing Wudi. Gu Xingyun's face was cloudy, and he began to be lost in thought for a while. Recently he was really physically and mentally exhausted. The great pressure and a series of bad news almost made him lose control of his emotions. Compared with Dongqing Wudi, who was also under the same pressure but still calm, Gu Xingyun finally realized that he was still impetuous. He slowly sat opposite Dongqing Wudi, picked up the teacup and took a sip without saying a word. Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun quietly. Among the top figures with high status and power in Zhongzhou State, he and Gu Xingyun were now the two most dangerous and under the most pressure. Kunlun City now seemed to have no loss of strength, but for the time being, it had no peak combat capability which made it passive everywhere. Once its reputation declined, its actual interests would inevitably shrink. After the end of the maneuver of the two academies, it could be seen from the final choices of those elite students. In this final maneuver of the two academies, Kunlun City lost a considerable part of its future. Dongqing Wudi was also having a hard time now. The trial day broke out in Eastern Europe, and the night in Yuzhou was also turbulent. The influence of the private transfer of troops was breaking out at an appalling speed and getting worse. One of his trusted deputy commanders in the garrison corps had been put in prison. The Air Force headquarters was in turmoil. In the Navy, the resignation of a deputy commander at the level of colonel of the fleet was the fuse. Now the fire was getting bigger and bigger. In various theaters of operations in recent days, several generals had expressed on different occasions that they clearly drew a line with Dongqing Wudi. And these generals used to be considered Dongqing Wudi's direct subordinates. Within the Border Control Corps, the game between Dijiang and several commanders was also intensifying. Even within the giant group, there were voices against Dongqing Wudi. Compared with Gu Xingyun, who was in decline but still irreplaceable for the time being, how long Dongqing Wudi could hold the position of the standing minister of the army headquarters had become the concern of the whole Zhongzhou state. Dongqing Wudi didn't worry much. Although he was under a lot of pressure, he was much calmer than Gu Xingyun. This time he knew very well that whether he would fall or not, this was the beginning of the decline of Kunlun City. Because of the rise of Li Tianlan. As for the Dongqing clan and himself, even if he was really forced to resign this time, the future of the Dongqing clan would still be infinitely bright. This was also because of the rise of Li Tianlan. No matter what would happen in the future, he would regard it as the last part of his political career. On this road, Dongqing Wudi relaxed and was fearless of everything. Only this relaxed and presumptuous mentality could make him the real god of massacre of Zhongzhou state. If God stood in his way, he would kill God. If Buddha stood in his way, he would kill Buddha. The delicate silence was finally broken. Gu Xingyun put down the teacup and said in a low voice, "Anyway, Li Tianlan is responsible. Jiang Shangyu just arrived in Eastern Europe, and Li Tianlan didn't play any role. I don't see his responsibility." Dongqing Wudi was still smiling and he said calmly, "I can only see Tianlan's contribution to Zhongzhou state. Your Highness, you know what this means. It's no exaggeration to say that in the whole of Eastern Europe, as long as we take down the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Zhongzhou state can even give up Snow Country. Although the 5 countries in Eastern Europe are not big, they are important cornerstones for Zhongzhou state to completely establish its position as the world's hegemon. It's no exaggeration to describe Tianlan's contribution. As for Jiang Shangyu, he was attacked in Im, and he didn't even arrive at the station of the Snowdance Corps. In order to protect him, Commander Cheng Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command was also seriously injured. Without prior preparation, Jiang Shangyu's disappearance was completely an accident. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, "And even if he disappeared inside the Snowdance Corps, what does it mean? Tianlan led the army north to expand the territory on behalf of Zhongzhou state, not to be a nanny. If Jiang Shangyu was really so important, why did he send him to Eastern Europe in the first place?" Gu Xingyun's face changed slightly. This was tantamount to directly transferring the contradiction to Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun avoided Dongqing Wudi's gaze and said, "Minister, do you mean that, as the marshal of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan has no responsibility for Jiang Shangyu's disappearance?" "He has the credit. Merit is merit and fault is fault. If the two can be confused, then many things will be difficult to deal with. Well, he has the credit. No one denies what he did in Eastern Europe, but Li Tianlan's temper is too strong and overbearing. Even if we don't talk about Jiang Shangyu, it's against the rules for him to kill Qin Qingwan. Even if Qin Qingwan violated the military order, it didn't affect the overall situation. Why kill him? If what he did in Eastern Europe is not dealt with, I think many comrades will have something to say. Yes, he has the credit. Gu Xingyun opened his mouth and looked at Dongqing Wudi. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He didn't care about Jiang Shangyu this time. Since Jiang Shangyu had completely fallen out with him, in his opinion, it was better for him to die. All the venting today was about Jiang Shangyu, but all the targets were Li Tianlan. He thought that Li Tianlan wanted to stay in Eastern Europe to run Wulan state at all costs. Such wild ambition had touched the bottom line of Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun was even a little afraid. He had not recovered from his injury. After a long time, 3 years, 5 years, if Li Tianlan, who developed unscrupulously in Eastern Europe, returned to Zhongzhou state again, who could control him? Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth and suddenly said, "Minister, there are some things that can't be ignored. I still suggest that Li Tianlan be transferred back to Zhongzhou state immediately. It's better to let others deal with the affairs in Eastern Europe." What he said was straightforward and clear. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and said with the same smile, "What's the reason? Like father, like son. Everyone knows what his father is like. Now Li Tianlan is in charge of a large number of troops. Bullshit." Dongqing Wudi, who had been smiling, suddenly put on a cold face and directly swore. He looked at the stunned Gu Xingyun and said expressionlessly, "Like father, like son? Are you even qualified to comment on his father?" Gu Xingyun was stunned for a moment and suddenly became angry out of shame. "What do you mean? Don't tell me I can't evaluate one. You just can't evaluate it." Dongqing Wudi said with cold eyes, "Like father, like son? Very good. If that's the case, it's best to let Tianlan take charge of the army." Gu Xingyun stood up and pointed at Dongqing Wudi, his fingertips trembling slightly. "You are simply unreasonable." Dongqing Wudi waved his hand and said in a cold voice, "See the guest out." Chapter 546. The midsummer in Mormons was still as cold as winter. It rained in the cold winter. The endless rain seemed to drift from Reki City to the northernmost part of snow country. It was not hurried, but the rain mixed with some broken ice hit people's faces and made them feel painful. Mormons in the rain was an extremely sharp city. The everlasting night remained unchanged. It rained between heaven and earth, and it was as sharp as a sword. When Deity got off the plane, the night in Mormons was dark and hazy. He looked down at the time on his watch. In a trance he couldn't tell whether it was day or night. Wisps of white air rose with his breath. At this time, it was the warmest season in Mormons. He reached out his hand and shook it casually. Feeling the cold rain between his fingers, he was silent for a long time. A black off-road vehicle was parked not far in front of the plane. As soon as Deity got off the plane, the door of the off-road vehicle had been opened. A middle-aged man less than 50 years old walked over quickly. The middle-aged man's appearance was not outstanding, but his every move was unusually calm. He was the kind of person who could make people feel at ease at first glance. Deity glanced at him and his eyes softened quietly. He smiled and waved at him. The middle-aged man paused and glanced at Daybreak. His eyes were a little cold. Then he walked up to Deity and said expressionlessly, "Where are you going, Your Highness?" This attitude was definitely not good. But Deity didn't mind at all. He just smiled kindly and said, "Have you had dinner? Do you want to have a bite nearby?" "No need." The middle-aged man said blandly, "Where are you going?" "Tianyin, watch your attitude." Daybreak finally couldn't bear it anymore. "Don't forget who is standing in front of you." Attitude. The middle-aged man's voice was cold. He seemed to be responding to Daybreak, but his eyes were looking straight into Deity's eyes. He was sharp and direct. "What attitude do you want?" Daybreak's eyes darkened and he was faintly angry. Deity suddenly waved his hand. "Well, we're on the same side. What's the point of quarreling as soon as we meet?" "I'm not talking to him." Tianyin looked at Deity calmly. "Your Highness, what attitude do you want?" Dawn and Daybreak's faces changed. They looked at Deity and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Deity fell silent. The atmosphere in the heavy rain suddenly became a little depressing. "Your Highness, Tianyin isn't." The anger in Daybreak's eyes suddenly subsided, and he pleaded for Tianyin. Deity waved his hand. He looked into Tianyin's eyes and said softly, "What I want is your attitude." "My attitude is very clear." Tianyin's tone was calm. Deity took a deep look at him, walked past him and got into the off-road vehicle. Tianyin stood there, bathed in the rain, his eyes clear and stubborn. "What are you doing?" Daybreak winked at dawn, asking him to follow Deity. Then he walked up to Tianyin and questioned him in a low voice. "Purgatory of Heaven Capital." Tianyin. The three masters under the god of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were Daybreak, Dawn and Phoenix, who respectively controlled the most elite and terrifying Senluo life-prolonging and Athanasi halls in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. However, the code name Tianyin was not ordinary. In the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, being able to use the word Tian as a code name had an extraordinary meaning. Tianyin was the deputy captain of the Athanasia Hall. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and was also Phoenix's most important assistant. This position was very high in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, but it was still far from deities. But the problem was that inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, there were too many stories about their own positions. How could a simple position determine the hierarchy? The relationship between Tianyin and deity was no less than that between Daybreak and deity. But even so, he still thought that Tianyin's performance was a bit excessive this time. Secretly competing with His Highness and confronting deity were two completely different concepts. "Nothing," Tianyin said expressionlessly. "Nothing. Why are you crazy?" Daybreak sneered. Tianyin looked at the falling rain in the night. After a long time he said faintly, "The rain is too heavy. I don't like it." He turned around and walked to the off-road vehicle. Daybreak looked at his back quietly. Tianyin's back was straight, but he felt a trace of loneliness from this straightness. Daybreak was a little annoyed and lost in thought. Loneliness. He had never thought that Tianyin would feel lonely among them. This was a real brother who had saved him, Daybreak and even deity. He was also a brother who had been saved by him and deity. On the battlefield they could trust each other with all their lives. He would be lonely. What? Daybreak shook his head hard and walked to the off-road vehicle. The rain in Mormons was too heavy, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was too big. In the vast Purgatory of Heaven Capital, he suddenly wanted to know who else would feel lonely. The off-road vehicle turned around and left in the increasingly messy heavy rain. Tianyin was silent as he drove. "Did we get anything in Mormons?" Deity broke the silence and suddenly asked. "No." Tianyin shook his head. He was a little serious but his tone was still a little bland. "The Samsara Palace left almost no traces here. We have checked in all fields but there is no trace of the Samsara Palace. After the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, I investigated some members of the Polar Ground Alliance and found a lot of things. There are a total of 22 four-star deacons who may be from the Samsara Palace, but it is only a possibility. According to our analysis, the lowest possibility is less than 5%, and the highest possibility is only 17%. Again, we haven't found any evidence at present." Deity did not speak. But the corners of Daybreak's eyes twitched, and they looked at each other. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, it was the largest and only superpower in Eastern Europe. In this behemoth spanning many countries in Eastern Europe, deacons were the real main force. The highest level of deacons was 5-star, and above them were the members of the Alliance. It was no exaggeration to say that any 4-star deacon was a respected middle-level or high-level figure in the Polar Ground Alliance. How many 4-star deacons were there in the entire Polar Ground Alliance? How many could they put down in Snow Country? If the Samsara Palace really had the ability to control 22 4-star deacons, it meant that they had monopolized nearly 1/5 of the Polar Ground Alliance's right to speak. This was simply a fantasy. They really hid it well. Deity whispered to himself. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital had started to make arrangements in Mormons more than 3 years ago. The earliest time was even before the final Battle of East Island. At that time, Zhongzhou State was still plotting against East Island. The master of Samsara Palace had just made an appointment to fight Gu Xingyun, and Daybreak had the first talk with Qin Weibai. In the end, there was the overall situation of the cooperation between the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Qin Weibai did not hide anything. With East Island as the beginning and Eastern Europe as the end, the whole orderly but extremely complicated plan had been told to deity from that time. Mormons would be the end of everything, and it would also be the place of the final battle. Deity naturally had to plant the seeds in Mormons as soon as possible. And the first batch of people to be sent to Eastern Europe, of course, had to be the kind of people he absolutely trusted and would not have the slightest doubt. There were 80 such people. Tianyin was the leader of this group of people. That was why Tianyin missed the final battle of East Island. Half a year ago, Tianyin should have resigned from his post here and returned to East Island to enjoy his life. He did go back, but he came back here in less than 3 months. Now Tianyin was still in control here. Deity had the same trust in him. Let's go here. Deity took out a map and pointed out a place to Tianyin. The terrain of Mormons was complicated, and so was the map. Tianyin glanced at it, then the off-road vehicle turned and began to speed up. It's the place where the urban area and the suburbs meet. There seems to be a manor. What else? Tianyin asked. That's the manor. Deity said with a smile. I made an appointment with Qin Weibai. This is the place she set. Tianyin said calmly, I'll investigate it carefully. Thank you. Deity looked at Tianyin for a while, then suddenly reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Tianyin did not stay silent, nor did he say any polite words. He just said calmly, Since it's been hard, when will your highness reward me? Tianyin. Daybreak's voice was cold. He really felt a little angry. Deity interrupted his anger and asked with a smile, What do you want? There's no need to be polite between us. As expected, Tianyin did not stand on ceremony. He said lightly, Sanluo life prolonging and Athanasi halls. Give me one. He glanced at Daybreak and Dawn. Daybreak and Dawn did not hesitate at all. They said in unison, I'll give you mine. Don't, I want Athanasi hall. Tianyin directly interrupted the two of them. Daybreak and Dawn looked at each other and saw the bitterness and helplessness in each other's eyes. Sanluo, Athanasi, and life prolonging. The power of the 3 hall masters in the purgatory of heaven capital was second only to deity. If Tianyin wanted to take it, Daybreak and Dawn could give it to him, no matter if it was Sanluo hall or the life prolonging hall. At this stage of friendship, a little power was really nothing. But Tianyin did not want it. He just wanted Athanasi hall. The master of Athanasi hall was Phoenix. Daybreak looked at deity, coughed, and said, Tianyin, I promise you that the comprehensive combat capability of Sanluo hall is definitely stronger than that of Athanasi hall. How about I follow his highness and you go to Sanluo hall? Among the 3 giants of the purgatory of heaven capital, Daybreak was the strongest. Sanluo hall was naturally stronger than the other 2 halls. If Tianyin took over this position, he could be said to be the real number 2 figure in the purgatory of heaven capital. Tianyin glanced at him. His eyes suddenly became a little mocking and mean. I take over Sanluo hall? Do I have to do something if I take it? There are some things that you don't have to do. I'm embarrassed. I want to be shameless. Besides, I don't want those brothers who died early to poke at my back. Daybreak's face changed slightly. He smiled bitterly and said nothing. Well, why don't you take over my... Shut up. Tianyin glanced at Dawn and said directly. Dawn shrugged his shoulders and stopped talking as expected. Tianyin just looked at deity and said calmly, Your Highness, will you give it to me or not? Daybreak sighed softly and finally kept silent. Tianyin's seniority was extremely high. Even in the Undying Palace, the Phoenix was still very polite and respectful to him, treating him as a big brother. Previously he did not know how the Phoenix offended Tianyin, but now he understood. The one who offended Tianyin was not the Phoenix but his highness. If I don't give it to you, what will you do? Deity suddenly asked. His eyes were still soft as he looked at Tianyin. What will you do? Tianyin was silent for a while and laughed at himself. What can I do? If your highness is reluctant, just let me leave the purgatory of heaven capital and go home. Go home? Deity whispered, Lin En? No, go to Tianan. Tianyin whispered and his eyes softened. I miss the young master. Deity was his master. But he had the young master. There was only one. There was only one. This was the biggest difference. Deity was silent. After a long time he said slowly, Why? There were many meanings in this question, but there was no emotion, not at all. Deity was calm, without sadness or joy. Tianyin was silent for a long time before he slowly asked, Because you can't imagine what a child who has lived in despair and fear since he was a child is like. He desperately wants to hold on to everything, desperately wants to protect everything, but he has been powerless. He can't cry, he can't retreat, and he can't be weak. When he is tired, sleepy, tired, or in pain, he can only grit his teeth and keep silent. You don't understand these, so you won't think about the meaning of his existence. If he didn't understand, of course, there was no meaning. Deity was in a daze and suddenly said, He cried in front of me. Yes, in front of you and only in front of you. Otherwise, who else can he be in front of? Only when he is in front of you, he feels that he is a child. Tianyin laughed mockingly and was extremely cold. But I don't think he will think so now. Deity's heart ached for no reason and he was silent. The car moved slowly on the flat road in the wind and rain. The street lights on both sides were gradually receding. After going around and around for nearly an hour, when the off-road vehicle was about to leave the city, Deity finally saw the manor built between the darkness and the light. The off-road vehicle stopped at the gate of the manor. 2 security guards in front of the door walked over quietly, looked at Deity and asked politely, "Who are you looking for?" Deity opened the door and got out of the car. He stood in front of the door and looked at the manor in the dark. The manor was hazy as if it was shrouded in a faint white mist. The temperature was 0 degrees and it was raining all over the sky, but the inside of the manor was like heaven. There were clusters of flowers, green grass and dense trees. In the huge manor, every corner was full of vitality. It was full of vitality. Deity looked at everything in the manor with a complicated look in his eyes. After a long time he slowly said, "Tell Qin Weibai that I am here." The wind and rain between heaven and earth suddenly quieted down. In an instant, the deep darkness seemed to completely solidify in an instant. Tianyin opened the door. Daybreak was ready to get out of the car. Dawn was going to speak. Deity was going to take a step. But everyone's movements froze in place in an instant. Deity's body tensed up, and he looked into the depths of the manor. A little darkness stretched out in his hand. In an instant, the ink in his hand had turned into a huge and ferocious black sickle. Before entering the door, Deity had already entered the fighting state. A wave of incomparably violent emotions suddenly filled the world. Anger, coldness, disgust, rejection, cruelty, excitement, countless emotions finally turned into the coldest killing intent, which directly spread throughout the entire manor. A little light appeared in front of Deity. It was colorful. The white clothes in his sight were flickering slightly. Every time she took a step, there was a colorful flowing light under her feet, which was dreamy and illusory. Qin Weibai's figure was erratic, and she finally appeared beside Deity. The killing intent between heaven and earth had completely condensed in one place, as if thunder would break out at any time. Qin Weibai's body was filled with colorful light, and she looked ethereal. Deity did not look at her, but stared at the nothingness behind her. After a long time he slowly said, "Is this the sword phoenix mentioned?" Qin Weibai nodded and said apologetically, "It has a bad temper and I can't control it." Deity smiled with a complicated meaning. Qin Weibai said calmly, "Your Highness, since you are here, why don't you go in and sit down and talk slowly?" Chapter 547. Reki City finally ushered in the long-lost peace. With the withdrawal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Vatican, the entire Wulan state became completely calm. Prime Minister Rieker became extremely busy. He dealt with the media, gave a speech to the people of Wulan state, strengthened their confidence and looked forward to real peace. At the same time he had to let his trusted subordinates infiltrate the various systems of Wulan state bit by bit. In addition he had to negotiate with the Rekvia family, prepare for next year's election, and receive Li Huaqing, the president of Zhongzhou state who would soon visit Wulan state. He also had to rebuild the presidential palace. Wulan state was very busy. Everyone was busy. President Li Huaqing's private plane would arrive at Reki City International Airport at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. It seemed like a visit but also like a tour. The calm and busy atmosphere impacted all levels of Wulan state with an unprecedented force, like big waves, strong winds and heavy rains. The general trend was mighty, and the former rules began to disappear one by one. In Wulan state, wherever the will of Zhongzhou state went, there would be new rules. From tomorrow on, Wulan state would officially enter a new era. The entire country, whether it was anticipation or unwillingness, joy or anger, everyone was preparing for the new era. Every minute and second of Prime Minister Rieker's time was extremely precious. Under such circumstances, he could sit outside Li Tianlan's study and wait quietly for 3 hours without showing the slightest anxiety, which showed the strength of the Prime Minister's heart. Li Tianlan was not in a hurry. Jiang Shangyu's disappearance did not seem to bring him much pressure. As soon as he learned the news, he only sent a small number of people to find Jiang Shangyu's whereabouts. After sending people out, Li Tianlan had not asked what the result was until now. There was no vice-marshal in the Snowdance Corps. All the tasks were on the 2 deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were Rieker and Rekvia in Wulan state. After the war, Li Tianlan had plenty of time. All he could do was wait. They were waiting for Li Huaqing to visit Wulan State. Other than that, he spent most of his time meditating and honing his sword intent. Ever since he was young, he firmly believed that power, wealth, and everything else could be fake, but only his own strength could be real. It was also the most basic thing. The storm in Reki City gradually subsided. The rainy season was over and winter was coming. When Li Tianlan woke up from meditation, the cold sword intent in the room had almost frozen everything in the study. A few steady heartbeats were audible to his senses. For clarity, Li Tianlan looked around. There was a soft couch in the study. Beside him was Dongqing Rushi, and a little farther away were Lin Yuxian and Li Wangxing. Together with Li Beidian and Ning Qianqing, they would be his core team in the future. Li Tianlan was never stingy with them. The whole world knew that his swordsmanship was perfect. When he practiced martial arts, he deliberately called Lin Yuxian and Li Wangxing over and imparted his understanding of swordsmanship to them without reservation. As for how much they could comprehend, it depended on their respective talents. Now it seemed that everyone had gained something. Dongqing Rushi had broken through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm for a while, and now her realm had been completely stabilized. Li Wangxing also showed signs of breaking through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Lin Yuxian's progress was undoubtedly the slowest, but it was not because his talent was the worst. It was because all aspects of his conditions were close to perfection. After he broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, even Li Tianlan's kendo did not help him much. This might be the most gratifying thing for the Lin clan. Obviously, Lin Yuxian was about to find his own way. Li Tianlan's eyes swept across everyone's faces. After a moment of silence, he stood up and walked out of the study. "Your Highness." Riker, who had gradually forgotten how long he had waited, stood up immediately and bowed slightly. Li Tianlan nodded, waved his hand and motioned for him to sit down. "Why are you here?" "Here's the thing." Riker deliberated over his words and said cautiously, "The heads of state of Ross, Oga Neoya Federation, and Drac have now arrived in Reki City. They hope to meet your Highness today. I wonder if it's convenient for you, your Highness?" Wulan State, Ross, Oga Neoya Federation, and Drac were the 5 Eastern European countries coveted by the whole world. The 5 countries advanced and retreated together, representing a large number of core interests in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan conquered Wulan State. He should have met the heads of state of the other 4 countries a long time ago, but he never had the time. But today, Li Tianlan's eyes were a little cold. After a moment of silence, he finally shook his head and said, "No need. President Li Huaqing will come tomorrow. We can meet them together." "But, Your Highness, this meeting is very—" Riker wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "I know." Li Tianlan interrupted him but didn't say much. Even if Riker was one of his own, there was no need to let him know too much about some things. Jiang Shangyu's disappearance had a great impact on him. Li Tianlan had received a phone call from Dongqing Wudi. In addition to a large delegation, there was also a supervisory group following Li Huaqing to Wulan State tomorrow. And it was the supervisory group directly affiliated with Kunlun City. There were only 5 people in the supervisory group, but all of them were thunder-shocking realm experts, which was rare. They came to Eastern Europe specifically to investigate the disappearance of Jiang Shangyu, and they pointed the spearhead at Li Tianlan. This was the collective decision of the Zhongzhou State Parliament. Even Dongqing Wudi did his best to stop it. It could be seen how much the members of Zhongzhou State were afraid of him now. What was ridiculous was that everyone thought that Li Tianlan was in Eastern Europe because he wanted to run Eastern Europe with his own army. In fact, Li Tianlan really wanted to leave here and develop in Tianan. But in any case at this time, Li Tianlan could only stay still and not move. Li Huaqing would arrive in Reki City tomorrow. The day before, Li Tianlan had received the heads of state of the 5 countries. When the news reached Eastern Europe, it could only make Zhongzhou State more afraid and suspicious of him. "I can't," Li Tianlan said slowly. His tone was calm and he spoke very slowly, but there was still a sense of depression accumulating in his heart. What kind of person was Riker? As a real old fox in politics, he almost smelled something wrong at the first time. "Zhongzhou State?" he asked cautiously. Li Tianlan glanced at him and did not speak. Riker suddenly understood what was going on. He smiled bitterly and whispered, "In this case, I'm afraid that President Li Huaqing can't control the situation." Li Tianlan could not meet the heads of state of the 4 countries today. Although it was only one day, in fact it was a world apart. Although a considerable part of the delegation led by Li Huaqing was the power of the giant group, He had to leave some soup for other groups. These people were a mix of good and bad. Who knew what would happen after tomorrow? Not to mention these people, even President Li Huaqing might have other plans in his heart. After all, allies and their own people were two completely different concepts. After all, this is Eastern Europe, right? Li Tianlan glanced at Rieker, intentionally or unintentionally, and said calmly and indifferently, "Yes." Rieker was shocked and thought about the meaning of Li Tianlan's words. But he said without hesitation, "Please rest assured, Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly asked, "How is the Sword Emperor these days?" Chapter 548. This question was too easy to answer. Not only Rieker but probably everyone in the Snowdance Corps now knew the Sword Emperor's whereabouts. The Sword Emperor didn't do anything. She simply couldn't be more obedient. He didn't do anything. Rick pondered seriously for a moment before he said, "Presently, the Sword Emperor is very idle every single day. He drinks tea and drinks wine. Besides that, he spends most of his time practicing calligraphy." Practicing calligraphy? Li Tianlan was in a trance for a moment. Rieker nodded as if he suddenly thought of something and then said, By the way, His Majesty asked the Snowdance Corps to prepare 2 sets of Han clothes for him yesterday. It was a very strange request." Li Tianlan did not speak. The kimono of East Island was similar to the Han costume with wide robes and wide sleeves, but the latter was more complicated, gorgeous and exquisite than the kimono. On the eve of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State, Wang Tianzong wanted to wear this ancient costume. In a sense, it was tantamount to showing that he still had his heart in Zhongzhou State. This kind of statement was very obscure, but Li Huaqing would definitely be happy to see it. Li Tianlan thought about it casually and didn't take it seriously. He just asked, "What did he write?" "I don't know." Rick shook his head helplessly. Now the whole world knew that Wang Tianzong was imprisoned in the office of the president of Wulan State by Li Tianlan, but only Wulan State did not dare to think so. Inside and outside Wulan State, everyone in the Snowdance Corps was polite and respectful to Wang Tianzong. He did not want to publicize what Wang Tianzong had written. Did anyone really dare to read it? Li Tianlan leaned on the sofa, lit a cigarette and muttered to himself, "Practice calligraphy, Hanfu." Suddenly he asked, "Are you sure he only got a few sets of ancient clothes?" "I'm sure," Rick said without hesitation. Wang Tianzong's purchase of ancient costumes through the Snowdance Corps was sent to his desk as soon as possible. In the past 20 years, Wulan State and Zhongzhou State had always been at odds. Naturally, there was no market for the so-called ancient costumes of Zhongzhou State. Rieker still asked someone to buy them from Mime and carefully checked them several times before handing them to Wang Tianzong. He personally took over all of this and watched them being sent to Wang Tianzong. There could be no other things in between. Li Tianlan took a drag on his cigarette and fell into deep thought. He completely let go of the matter of the ancient costume. He was thinking about why Wang Tianzong wanted to practice calligraphy. His thoughts kept drifting away. He thought of the Li family, the Lin clan, the Wang family of Beihai, and even more than 20 years ago. When he was at the border of Zhongzhou State, Li Honghe made him practice calligraphy every day since he was a child and even before he left. A worn-out writing brush landed on the yellowish-white rice paper. Every stroke was a sword light. But this was not the path of the Li family. The Li family's 24 moves of sword only wanted the sword energy to be sharp and break the sky. This was also not the path of the Wang family of Beihai. The martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai broke out in an instant and became invincible in the world. But now Wang Tianzong was practicing calligraphy. Every move of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State was not meaningless. The Lin clan began to become clear in his mind. He thought of Lin Youxian's attack in front of him. The martial arts of the Lin clan and the Li family were of the same origin, but they were different from each other. They had the same map of God of War and the same 24 moves of sword. The Li family focused on the sword while the Lin clan focused on the intent. It was not until Li Tianlan traveled thousands of miles in the past 3 years that he understood the meaning of Li Honghe's asking him to practice calligraphy. His sword intent became perfect in the 3-year journey, and the starting point of all this was that worn-out writing brush. Practicing calligraphy was practicing swordsmanship. Wang Tianzong was accumulating his sword intent. Li Honghe understood the emphasis of the Lin clan's martial arts, so did Wang Tianzong. The sword intent continued to be all-encompassing. Wang Tianzong had really reached the last step of the breakthrough. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little cold inside. He looked out of the window and did not speak for a long time. "Your Highness, do you want?" Rieker coughed and hesitated. "No need." Li Tianlan shook his head. From now on you don't need to pay attention to the Sword Emperor. How can that be? Rieker stood up subconsciously. It's useless to pay attention to it. Let's wait. Li Tianlan stood up and walked to the study saying calmly, wait for him to leave. Rieker's brain went blank for a moment and he asked instinctively, where are you going, Your Highness? Li Tianlan did not look back but said calmly, I'm also practicing calligraphy. He pushed open the door of the study and walked in. The petite Dongqing Rushi had already woken up. She blinked her clear eyes and said, do you want to practice calligraphy? Li Tianlan looked at her, smiled and said softly, get the pen and paper ready. He should have thought of this method a long time ago. When he was in the Sky Academy, when he wrote the 3 words, East Emperor Palace, he vaguely knew this method. But now he remembered it after being reminded by Wang Tianzong. Using the pen as a sword and condensing the sword intent. It was to hide the sword and also to nurture the sword. This might be the only way for him to make the perfect sword intent go further. Dongqing Rushi quickly prepared the pen and paper and stood beside Li Tianlan to grind the ink. Her body had a very light fragrance and she looked very focused. The sound of wind and rain came into his ears. Li Tianlan stood in front of the table with the pen, as if he was holding a sword. A sword intent condensed into a line from his wrist and the tip of the pen. Li Tianlan looked at the paper in front of him quietly. His eyes were calm like the deep starry sky. At the same time, in the only intact room in the office of the president, Wang Tianzong was also practicing calligraphy. He was wearing a dark Han costume. His lapel and sleeves were fluttering, but his hand holding the pen was unusually stable and did not tremble at all. The room was intact, the white paper, the heavy ink, the dark ancient costume and the tall and straight figure. Everything seemed to become one invisibly. Everything in the world was shaking gently with the pen in Wang Tianzong's hand. Everything finally became a sword. It was extremely solemn and dignified. Only a few hundred words appeared on the paper, one stroke at a time. Wang Tianzong's handwriting was not beautiful, and it could not even be said to be particularly neat. But there was a kind of awe-inspiring and even submissive power between the horizontal and vertical strokes. This kind of power was not sharp, but heavy enough to crush everything in an instant. His eyes were focused and serious. He put the pen down. The last word. At the same time, Li Tianlan's pen crossed the paper. The first word. An extremely violent sword energy flew up in an instant as Li Tianlan put the pen down, expanding to the whole study, layer upon layer, mysterious and unpredictable. In the study it instantly became cold. Dongqing Rushi, who was standing next to Li Tianlan, moved a little uneasily. Everything in her sight did not change, but vaguely, it seemed that the whole space began to gradually condense. The sword energy became more and more fierce with the stroke of the pen tip. Lin Fengting, who was meditating, opened his eyes directly. He glanced around blankly and finally saw Li Tianlan behind the desk. This scene was too familiar to him. His pupils suddenly shrank. Li Wangxing also woke up. Everyone's eyes fell on the rice paper in front of Li Tianlan. That was his first word. It was simple. There was only one horizontal stroke, which was one. No one knew that in the office of the president, Wang Tianzong's last word was also simple. There was only one horizontal stroke, which was also one. It ended with one word. It began with one word. One word was like a sword. Chapter 549. There was no polar night in Reki City. But the continuous heavy rain made Reki City gloomy day and night. There was rain everywhere. There was no sunlight and the night was no longer pure. Because of the heavy rain, the special flight from Zhongzhou State to Reki City was delayed for several hours. When the special plane painted with the star flag landed at the airport, it was close to noon. It was 10:40 in the morning on August 23 in Eastern Europe. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State officially arrived in Wulan State. Zhongzhou State's footsteps were moving. From today on, the whole of Eastern Europe would officially enter a new era with the footsteps of Zhongzhou State. The welcome ceremony could not be any more grand. Headed by Prime Minister Rieker, all the high-level officials of Wulan State were present. Both sides of the airport were filled with welcoming crowds with flowers in their hands. The aisle was full of salutes. In order to welcome President Li Huaqing, Prime Minister Rieker had specially changed his own car the day before. It was a red flag car for high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. The black and quaint body was parked quietly in the airport, which was very eye-catching. Almost all the media in Eastern Europe praised President Li Huaqing's visit. They called this visit the first handshake between Zhongzhou State and Eastern Europe, and said that the arrival of President Li Huaqing was of epoch-making significance to Wulan State and the whole of Eastern Europe. With the help of Zhongzhou State, the whole of Eastern Europe was bound to be more brilliant tomorrow. Zhongzhou State was bound to be the most trustworthy friend of the Eastern European people, and Eastern Europe would become the most loyal partner of Zhongzhou State. All of them sang praises of merit and virtue. After the collapse of the Violet family and the Morton family, the advantages of the Qin clan and the Rekvia family in the media were fully manifested. The two families almost effortlessly controlled the direction of public opinion in Eastern Europe. In the endless praise of the media, President Li Huaqing came to Eastern Europe this time as a savior. The image of the entire Zhongzhou State became extremely high and bright. As the representative of Zhongzhou State in Wulan State at this time, Li Tianlan was standing on the other side of the welcoming team of Wulan State, subtly distancing himself from the delegation of Wulan State. Behind him stood the two vice-marshals of the Snowdance Corps, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were only 3 of them. 1 marshal and 2 lieutenant generals. The 3 of them were dressed in military uniforms. They stood there silently and indifferently, like 3 unsheathed swords. Countless cameras near the airport were moving in an orderly manner, recording all the images and sending them to major TV stations around the world as soon as possible. At this moment, Wulan State had become the focus of the world. In the heavy rain, the plane finally stopped. The gangway ladder fell and the cabin opened. The figure of President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State appeared in front of the cabin door. The president, who was in his 60s, was full of energy and waved to the crowd below with a smile. His eyes were calm and gentle, and he looked straight ahead as if he had seen far away. At this moment, whether it was the general or the prime minister, the senior officials or the civilians or even this country, they all belonged to Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing was in a trance for a moment, and then he took a deep look at Li Tianlan, who was standing on the other side of the crowd. Li Huaqing adjusted his mood, walked down the gangway ladder slowly, and shook hands with Prime Minister Riker, who was coming toward him. There were not many high-level officials of Wulan State. Riker followed him and introduced everyone's duties in detail. It was not known whether Li Huaqing was listening or not, but he just nodded with a calm smile. After shaking hands with the last high-level official of Wulan State, Li Huaqing walked up to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who was dressed in military uniform, stood taller. His expression was calm and he raised his hand to salute. "You're very good. The Snowdance Corps is very good." Li Huaqing stood in front of Li Tianlan, and his voice was soft and clear. "Thank you, Marshal Li." He reached out his hand and tidied Li Tianlan's military uniform and rank. Then he raised his arm and saluted back solemnly. In an instant, the flashing lights of countless cameras connected into one. The next second, the whole world was in an uproar. Because countless cameras directly captured the epaulets on Li Tianlan's shoulders. The dark world was okay. But ordinary people all over the world could not believe their eyes. For ordinary people, they might not understand what the sharp sword on Li Tianlan's epaulette meant, but few people did not know what the 4 golden stars surrounded by the golden olive branch meant. Marshal of Zhongzhou State. Such a young marshal? The TV screens of various countries froze on Li Tianlan's face and epaulettes. The combination of the young and calm face and the golden epaulettes brought an almost unforgettable impact and made everyone's heart surge. This might be the first time that the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State appeared in front of the world. At this moment, it was raining in Reki City. But Li Tianlan stood in front of Li Huaqing and the whole world under the rain, and he was unprecedentedly brilliant. Mormons. In the living room of the manor, Li Tianlan's face appeared on the ultra-clear TV screen. A white and slender palm gently touched Li Tianlan's face across the screen, gentle and almost careful. Qin Weibai's fingers moved gently on the screen. She stared deeply at the picture on the TV, and her warm eyes were full of intoxication. "Is he handsome?" she asked suddenly. The picture on the TV began to change. Qin Weibai turned around and looked at a woman behind her. She was dressed in a white dress. The woman behind her was dressed in a white robe. "Handsome," the woman in the white robe said softly. She was tall and slender and her face was exquisite. She looked dreamlike and perfect without any flaws. "You really have a good eye." She looked at Qin Weibai and exclaimed sincerely, "Do you like it?" Qin Weibai asked softly. The woman hesitated and lowered her head. Light footsteps sounded outside the door. Flaming Fire walked in, looked at Qin Weibai and said, "Boss, are you looking for me?" "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded, turned to look at the screen and said calmly, Since the president is here, our plan should start. Inform him to get ready for action. Okay. Flaming Fire, who had been prepared, nodded. She took 2 steps back and was ready to leave. But the moment she turned around, her eyes inadvertently swept over the woman in the white robe behind Qin Weibai. The woman just raised her head and their eyes met. The woman in the white robe looked a little surprised. But Flaming Fire's body suddenly stiffened. She stared at the woman in her sight as if she had seen a ghost. Go and do your work. Qin Weibai's cold voice sounded. Flaming Fire suddenly came to her senses, turned around subconsciously and left. Before she went out, she staggered and almost fell down. Qin Weibai turned to look at the woman in the white robe behind her. She was dreamlike, perfect and flawless like a phantom. She was silent for a long time before she repeated her question. Do you like it? The woman in the white robe hesitated. Qin Weibai said directly, I'll give him to you, okay? Chapter 550. There was a dead silence in the room. Only the voice on the TV screen was endlessly praising the friendliness, tolerance and fraternity of Zhongzhou State. More than 80% of the people in Wulan State were eagerly looking forward to the cooperation between Wulan State and Zhongzhou State. Everything was so beautiful. But the reality was so cruel. News and reality were like 2 different worlds. The screen was constantly switching. President Li Huaqing. Prime Minister Rieker. Many high-level officials of Wulan State. A large delegation. The young, sharp and calm marshal of Zhongzhou State, who was as deep as the starry sky. In the constantly switching pictures, a group of people walked to the black car with a red flag at the airport. Prime Minister Rieker took 2 quick steps, bent down and opened the door for Li Huaqing himself. This scene fell into the eyes of people all over the world. The salute and cheers seemed to pause for a moment. The news also paused for a moment. Li Huaqing smiled and sat in the back of the car. But Prime Minister Rieker did not get up. He still kept his bent posture and waited with a smile on his face. The young marshal who had shocked the world looked at Rieker with a smile and also got into the car. Rieker straightened up and carefully closed the door. The news anchor was obviously stuttering. He stuttered a few lines before he regained his composure. The woman in white and Qin Weibai watched this scene quietly. Qin Weibai's eyes were warm and gentle. That kind of deep love was extremely strong, with a kind of unforgettable power. The woman in white was in a trance. Her eyes were bright. When she was in a trance, her cold eyes were like a shaking starry sky. I'll give him to you, okay? Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very light, but it carried the weight of the world. Give him to me. The woman in white's voice was clear and soft, with a kind of confusion and complexity as if it were yesterday. She was indeed beautiful. Perfect. The so-called perfection could be described with any beautiful word, but no beautiful word was enough to describe it. Her face was exquisite and sharp. Every line and every detail of her body was flawless. Dressed in simple yet elegant white clothes, she stood there as if her entire body was glowing. Noble and holy, cold and pure, she was devastatingly beautiful, like a grand and magnificent dream. Her voice was light, clear and soft. He has always been mine. Qin Weibai was silent for a while. Then he nodded. That's right, he's yours. She looked into her eyes. So, do you love him? A hint of confusion appeared in the woman's sparkling eyes. I don't know. She moved her feet lightly and sat on the sofa at the side. A book was placed next to the sofa. It was neither thin nor thick, and its cover was a vast expanse of white. Her slender fingers took the book and opened it. The handwriting inside was not printed, but handwritten. The handwriting was delicate, and every stroke was carefully written. She lowered her head to look at the book in her hands, lost in thought. Everyone has a story, so everyone is a story. Qin Weibai said softly, putting everyone's story into one story is the whole world. But this is not my world. The woman raised her head and looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes. But Tianlan is here. Qin Weibai said softly. The woman stopped talking and lowered her head again as if she was trying to think. Don't think about it. Qin Weibai chuckled, perfect. You love him. Her tone was brief but extremely sure. The woman raised her head and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. What? Because I love him. Qin Weibai said calmly, you will naturally protect what I love. I'm not your shadow and I'm not your puppet. There was a touch of anger in the woman's cold eyes. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly for a long time. The woman met her eyes without dodging. I'm sorry. Qin Weibai didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like a minute, but it also felt like a lifetime. Qin Weibai spoke softly with an apologetic tone. There was a flash of fear in the eyes of the woman in white. She shook her head subconsciously and stammered, "No, no. You are indeed not my shadow, nor are you my puppet." Qin Weibai said softly, "At least not now. But I am your destiny and also your guilt. This has long been decided." The woman's breathing gradually quickened. She suppressed her inner emotions, but all her emotions seemed to have reached the critical point. She began to collapse, and her voice also sounded like she was about to cry. "Why, who knows?" Qin Weibai walked up to her, reached out and gently stroked her soft black hair. She whispered, "In fact, it's not bad. At least, you have the qualification to be by his side." A colorful light lit up the room. The sword intent in the nothingness was extremely soft. The soft sword intent wrapped around the woman in white and then Qin Weibai. It seemed to be comforting, but it didn't know who to comfort. The sword body turned slightly, and the slight sound of the sword seemed to be a sigh. The two of them were completely enveloped in the colorful light. One stood and one sat. Both were perfect and flawless. Unparalleled charm? Unparalleled? There was a sudden knock on the door. The woman in white was shocked and subconsciously wanted to stand up to avoid it. "Sit down." Qin Weibai whispered, "Mr. Lin is not an outsider." The woman in white hesitated and slowly sat down. Qin Weibai sat beside her, looked at the door and said, "Please come in." Lin Fengting walked in from the outside with a chuckle. He saw Qin Weibai and the woman in white sitting on the sofa at the first moment. Even Lin Fengting, who had a strong will and had seen too many bizarre things in his life, was stunned for a moment and dazzled. He shook his head subconsciously and carefully looked at the space where the two of them were. He was dumbfounded, and his eyes became extremely strange for a moment. This. Lin Fengting's eyes kept glancing around and he couldn't say a word for a while. He stuttered several times before he managed to calm down. He took a deep breath and said, "This is? Let me introduce you." Qin Weibai stood up and whispered, "This is Mr. Lin Fengting, the current patriarch of the Lin clan, and my most respected elder." She paused and said, "The only one." The woman in white stood up subconsciously and bowed slightly to Lin Fengting. In a short time Lin Fengting's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He waved his hand randomly and stared at the woman in white without caring about politeness. Qin Weibai looked at the woman in front of her with a smile and whispered, I have my own name." The woman in white suddenly said, "At least now, I have the right to use my own name." The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched and he looked confused. Qin Weibai nodded and said quietly, "Her name is Xian Yan." The family name was not unimportant. But standing in the woman's current position, she had no family name. Xian Yan. This name was really worthy of the name. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time, then slowly exhaled and whispered, No wonder. He looked at Qin Weibai with complicated eyes and said, "It's her?" Qin Weibai nodded. Lin Fengting didn't know what to say for a moment. He suddenly wanted to drink, but there was no wine here. He had to light a cigarette, take a deep breath, and then said with emotion, "You are simply a miracle." Qin Weibai smiled. The woman in white reached out and took out a piece of gauze. She covered her face with the gauze and left the room with light steps. "She is your real trump card, isn't she?" Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai, and no one knew what kind of emotion was contained in his tone. "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while. He seemed to suddenly think of something and said, I just remembered that flaming fire is waiting outside. It seems that she wants to make trouble and she is full of murderous intent." As he said this, he subconsciously wanted to turn around. Qin Weibai had turned on the monitor outside the door and said calmly, "It's okay." A sword light lit up on the monitor outside the door. The sword light was cold and sharp. Flaming fire held the long sword in her hand, and the blade fell steadily on the neck of the woman in white. The super master who had the closest relationship with Qin Weibai in Samsara Palace was expressionless, but her eyes were full of murderous intent. "Who the hell are you?" After the woman in white left Qin Weibai, her whole aura seemed to change quietly and became extremely quiet. She looked at flaming fire calmly and said with a chuckle, "Who do you think I am? You've seen me before." "I did see you before, but I didn't really see you until today." There was a suppressed rage and panic in Flaming Fire's voice. "Who the hell are you? What do you think?" The woman in white smiled playfully. "Do you really think that I dare not kill you?" Flaming Fire's voice was cold. "Do you really dare to?" The woman in white asked back. Flaming Fire's eyes became sharp, and the long sword suddenly pressed down. The blade cut the skin of the woman in white in an instant, but there was no blood. The white clothes in front of her twisted in a trance and finally became illusory. Flaming Fire raised her head and looked at the door. 10 meters away from her, the woman in white was standing there. What Flaming Fire had just seen was an illusion. Flaming Fire took a deep breath, and her plump chest rose and fell slightly. The woman in white glanced at her and said blandly, "Your sword is good, but your vision is poor." She turned to leave and said slowly, "Let me introduce myself. I am Xian Yan." Lin Fengting, who saw this scene through the monitor screen, did not speak for a long time. Qin Weibai took the initiative to say, "What can I do for you, sir?" Lin Fengting's heart was in a mess. He managed to sort out his thoughts and said slowly, "Flaming Fire just said that it's about to start?" "Yes." Qin Weibai poured a cup of tea for Lin Fengting. "It's time. But in the current situation, where do we start?" Lin Fengting asked. "The situation in Eastern Europe should naturally start from Eastern Europe," Qin Weibai said calmly. Lin Fengting was silent for a while and then tentatively said, "The chaos in Eastern Europe began with the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. The base alliance is not far from here. Their headquarters can be said to be here." Qin Weibai whispered, "Since the chaos started here, it will end here. Let's start with the Polar Ground Alliance." Lin Fengting took a deep look at her and did not speak. "If I say that Sir is my most respected elder, will you believe me?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. "Of course not." Lin Fengting laughed. "Boss Qin, what kind of person do you think so highly of me? There must be a reason. Because of your friendship, because of the saint of the Lin clan." Qin Weibai finished a cup of tea, stood up and said slowly, "I don't know the result of this battle. I want to ask you something." Lin Fengting nodded. "Go ahead." "If I die, everything in the Lin clan for 20 years can be handed over to Xian Yan. I only ask for a cemetery. Then my ashes can be buried on the hill behind the flowing light waterfall of the Lin clan." Qin Weibai whispered. Lin Fengting's face changed and his eyes were a little bitter. "If I am lucky enough to survive," Qin Weibai laughed. "At that time, please take me away, sir." "Leave." "Leave?" It was normal to leave. Qin Weibai's voice was also very ordinary, but Lin Fengting heard a touch of determination. Lin Fengting stood there without saying a word. "I'll take it as a yes," Qin Weibai whispered. She left the room with the sword in the void. "Where are you going?" Lin Fengting asked. "Reki City." Qin Weibai's voice was calm and distant. Lin Fengting walked to the window and looked at the night rain outside. Under the polar night, whether it was noon or late at night, it was night and heavy rain outside the window. The darkness gradually became deeper. Lin Fengting could already see the end of everything. That was the end of the old era. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. Chapter 551. The rain beat on the car window and the sound was messy and hurried. The atmosphere in the car was depressing and dull. Li Huaqing looked at the scenery outside the window with a smile. Through the rain, the scenery was blurred and his eyes were a little blurred. "Your Highness, Mr. President, shall we go straight back to the hotel?" Rieker sat in the passenger seat and turned around to ask. Under normal circumstances, when the president of Zhongzhou State visited Wulan State, he naturally had to stay in the office of the president temporarily. But now the office of the president had become a ruin, and only Wang Tianzong's room was still intact. Wulan State could only temporarily arrange the distinguished guests of Zhongzhou State in the hotel. Li Huaqing sensitively noticed the order of Rieker's address. He smiled and said softly, "I'm a guest. I'm here for a lot of things but not much. Mr. Prime Minister, we must have a good chat when we have time." "Of course." Rieker nodded quickly and thoughts kept turning in his mind. Li Huaqing only had 5 days to stay in Wulan State, and the other 2 days had to travel to the other 4 countries. Time was very tight. This was his first day. Li Huaqing had a reason to do a lot of things, such as arranging a meeting with the high level of Wulan State and signing the agreement as soon as possible. He also wanted to see Wang Tianzong, who was imprisoned in the office of the president, or visit the Snowdance Corps. In addition, Wulan State also prepared a very high-level banquet. The theme of the banquet was the future development of Eastern Europe. As Zhongzhou State's position in Wulan State gradually stabilized, the general trend of the whole Eastern Europe gradually stabilized. Everyone knew that if they wanted to survive in Eastern Europe and live well in the future, they had to depend on Zhongzhou State. Therefore, at this banquet, Wulan State sent invitations to countless families and groups throughout Eastern Europe. At the same time, the delegation brought by Li Huaqing also participated in the banquet. This was the first large-scale banquet held by the forces of Zhongzhou State and Eastern Europe. To some extent, it could almost determine the pattern of Eastern Europe for at least decades. This could be said to be the most important thing. But the funny thing was that the time of the banquet had not been accurately set yet. Riker had to wait for Li Huaqing's nod. He thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Mr. President, here's the thing. Wulan State has prepared a very grand welcome banquet. Tonight I don't know, put it off for the time being." Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Tomorrow night." Rick was stunned. He subconsciously wanted to nod, but he felt that something was wrong. He could only continue to look at Li Huaqing, but his eyes were obviously a little perfunctory. Li Huaqing's smile remained unchanged. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Tianlan, do you have a different opinion?" Li Tianlan looked at the wind and rain outside the window. Under the wind and rain, Reki City was desolate. On that day, his sword lit up in front of the Caesar Hotel and tore up half of the city. The sword was 10,000 meters long, and the damage left in the city had not been repaired yet. At this time, Wulan State was much more lively, but there were still some traces of the war. "The Snowdance Corps has 20,000 people." Li Tianlan said calmly, "From I'm to here, more than 2,000 soldiers have fallen. We marched all the way, covering a distance of hundreds of miles, and stained with blood all the way. On the night we beat back the dark forces, more than 1,200 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps fell in this city. We can achieve what we have now because the Snowdance Corps has paid nearly 4,000 lives." Rick's face was a little pale and he was fidgeting. Li Tianlan's voice became calmer and calmer. Whether it was an invincible realm expert or the coalition forces of other countries, the Snowdance Corps has never retreated. We fought all the way from Im to Reki City. There was no deserter in the Snowdance Corps. They all died in a dignified battle, so they are all martyrs. This city and this country will be engraved with the brand of Zhongzhou State in the future. But no one should forget everything here. It has been dyed red by the blood of the martyrs of Zhongzhou State. He turned to look at Li Huaqing and said calmly, "Mr. President, you shouldn't forget." Li Huaqing was not embarrassed. Instead he looked solemn. He looked at Li Tianlan, nodded solemnly and said, "I think I know what I should do today." He glanced at Rick and said gently, "Mr. Prime Minister, let's go to the station of the Snowdance Corps now and inform the rear vehicles. All the members of the delegation have to go." Rick smiled bitterly and nodded. In fact, when the president of Zhongzhou State visited Wulan State, everything was arranged in advance. However, there was a small disagreement between Rick and Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's meaning was very simple. On the first day of Li Huaqing's arrival in Wulan State, he had to visit the Snowdance Corps. The ashes of nearly 4,000 martyrs had not yet been buried, and the star flag of Zhongzhou State had already flown up in the Hero Square in the center of Reki City. For Li Tianlan, it was his most important thing to bury thousands of martyrs. However, Rick also had his own pressure. Now, the entire top management of Wulan State and even the interest class of the whole Eastern Europe hoped that the dinner could be held as soon as possible. The pressure Rick was under could be imagined. After weighing the pros and cons, he put the dinner first and the memorial service later. In this way, Li Tianlan might not like it, but Rick believed that he could explain it. However, Rick glanced at Li Tianlan and sighed softly in his heart. He picked up the walkie-talkie and began to instruct the motorcade to turn around. The Snowdance Corps was still temporarily stationed in the parade square in front of the office of the president. When the luxurious motorcade drove into the square, all the top management of the Snowdance Corps had arrived. The soldiers, injured or not, were all gathered in the square. When Li Huaqing got out of the car, there were only a little more than 10,000 elites stationed in Reki City now. They raised their hands and saluted at the same time. The wind and rain were messy, but a whistling sound broke out in the square because of the tens of thousands of people raising their hands. In an instant, it seemed that even the wind and rain between heaven and earth had become fierce. Li Tianlan followed Li Huaqing. The top management of the Snowdance Corps came over. Cool breeze and drifting clouds stood on the left and right. Standing in the middle of them was Tribulation, who had just come out of the hospital. Tribulation's body was still weak and his face was pale, but his body was as sharp as a sword. Li Huaqing shook hands with him and said gently, "How's your injury?" "I'm fine." Tribulation's voice was clear and indifferent. Such an occasion was obviously not suitable for detailed discussion. He pointed to the temporary high platform in the center of the square and said softly, "President, please." Li Huaqing took a deep breath, looked at the soldiers of Zhongzhou State who raised their hands and saluted him, and strode to the high platform. There were no flowers on the high platform, only a microphone. Li Huaqing stood on it and was instantly drenched by the wind and rain. Li Huaqing held the microphone, his eyes calm and dignified. The next second, his voice resounded throughout the square and the whole world. "You are all heroes of Zhongzhou State, the pride of Zhongzhou State. I am Li Huaqing. Today at this moment I promise you in the name of the President of Zhongzhou State that Zhongzhou State will never let down any martyr or soldier. In this war, whether survivors or victims, Zhongzhou State is proud of you. Today I am here with you to send all the martyrs on their way." In the wind and rain, Li Huaqing's voice was clear and loud. This speech of less than 10 minutes had no passion, no blood, only calm and solemnity. In the square, countless members of the Snowdance Corps began to turn and walk to the Hero Square in the center of the city. Li Huaqing walked down the high platform, looked at the empty office of the president, and looked at the only intact room in sight. He was silent for a while. "Let's go and see Tianzong." He looked at Li Tianlan and said calmly. It was not a question. Li Tianlan nodded and led the way. At the funeral of the Snowdance Corps, there had to be a president and a sword emperor. There had to be a sword emperor. Wang Tianzong was still practicing calligraphy. Everything outside seemed to have no effect on him. He stood in front of the table with a pen so focused. When Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing came in, he did not look up and just said casually, "You're here?" "I just arrived." Li Huaqing looked around with a chuckle and said, "It seems that you're doing well here. It's good to be able to cultivate one's body and mind." Wang Tianzong spoke calmly and wrote calmly. A lot of rice paper had been scattered in the room. It was densely packed and the strokes were light and restrained. At the end of each stroke there was a character. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the countless rice papers full of handwriting. There was clearly no sword intent around him, but the power in each stroke made him feel as if he couldn't breathe. His gaze fell on the last piece of calligraphy. Wang Tianzong's last stroke was very short. "How's my handwriting?" he asked softly. "Good handwriting." Li Tianlan did not hesitate. He nodded directly and said affirmatively. "Good handwriting?" Wang Tianzong smiled and suddenly waved the pen in his hand. One word was like a sword. In an instant, Wang Tianzong seemed to wave a sword in front of Li Tianlan. Everything in front of him disappeared in front of Li Tianlan. The house, the president, and the sword emperor completely disappeared. There was only one sword left in his sight. There was no sword energy or killing intent. It was light and dignified, pure sword. Li Tianlan suddenly closed his eyes. His eyes seemed to be stimulated by something and tears kept flowing. Wang Tianzong's voice sounded in his ear. "Your sword is very important to my achievements today." Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. That night, he and Wang Tianzong fought across half of the city, but the fundamental purpose was to mislead Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong was not misled. Instead, he completed the sword and completely completed his sword intent. Li Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's eyes were gentle and deep, like the sky and the sea, unfathomable. "You flatter me," Li Tianlan said calmly. "That's the truth." Wang Tianzong turned back, picked up the calligraphy and said quietly, "In return, this calligraphy is for you." Li Tianlan quietly looked at the calligraphy in Wang Tianzong's hand. There was rice paper everywhere in the room, and Wang Tianzong's notes were everywhere. But the notes were not the same. In other words, they were decreasing. Wang Tianzong's first stroke was full of hundreds of words, and the fewer the words were at the end. At this moment, there were only 2 sentences left in Wang Tianzong's hand. Each stroke was simple but majestic. The signature was Beihai Tianzong. There was no surname. With Beihai there was no need for a surname. Li Tianlan stared at the handwriting in front of him. 2 simple sentences, but they showed the spirit of the Sword Emperor. The unparalleled sword in the world. "I am the most ambitious person in history." Between the strokes, the sword intent formed a storm and completely swallowed Li Tianlan. "I am the most ambitious person in history." What a peerless sword. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said in a hoarse voice, "Perfect." Chapter 552. For Wulan State, the Hero Square in Reki City had been endowed with a lot of sacred meanings since the founding of the country. This was the resting place of heroes and the origin of countless epic legends. There were countless monuments in the huge hero square, and each monument represented a soul-stirring story. This was the most sacred place in Reki City, and it was also the cemetery chosen by Li Tianlan for the victims of the Snowdance Corps. It was raining heavily and the sky was dark. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps had completely surrounded the hero square. There were 3 extremely tall flagpoles in the center of the square. The star flag of Zhongzhou State was hung on the highest flagpole. Even in the heavy rain it was still flying. A little lower than the star flag was the flag of Wulan State, and the flagpole on the left side of the star flag was still empty. Cool breeze and drifting cloud, dressed in military uniform, stood under the flagpole, holding a scarlet military flag and standing solemnly. The usually quiet and elegant hero square had been completely replaced by a warm scarlet color. The intense scarlet color covered the center of the square, and even the monuments around it had become pale under the illumination of the intense color. That was the military flag of the Snowdance Corps, which was made by Prime Minister Rieker himself. The pattern of the military flag was simple and clear. An extremely sharp golden long sword was outlined on the scarlet base. Golden spots of light were dancing around the long sword, like flying snow, flames and falling blood. This was the military flag that Wulan State had started making a few days ago. It was nearly thousands of meters long and wide. At this time, the huge scarlet flag was spread on the hero square. This scarlet color seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth. All the experts above the fire-flaming realm of the Snowdance Corps gathered around the huge military flag. There were more than 10,000 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, and there were actually many experts in the fire-flaming realm. However, the military flag, which almost covered the entire square, was so big that even if all the experts in the fire-flaming realm stood there, they still seemed extremely sparse. But in terms of function, hundreds of experts in the fire-flaming realm were enough. In the strong wind and heavy rain, every expert in the fire-flaming realm was controlling his own power. The surging heat waves completely dispelled the chill between heaven and earth and evaporated the rain. In the rainy weather, the whole square was dry. The military flag of the Snowdance Corps was still scarlet and unstained by dust. Under this huge military flag, the ashes of nearly 4,000 people who had sacrificed their lives were quietly placed. The ashes were light, but for Zhongzhou State they weighed more than anything else. From the high-level members of the Snowdance Corps to the soldiers, all stood quietly in every corner of the square. There was no wind or rain, no cold or sound here. It was so quiet that it seemed to be frozen. When Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan came to the hero square, they saw such a quiet and almost eternal scene. Wang Qianzong, who had walked out of the office of the president, stood not far from the two of them. Looking at this scene, he narrowed his eyes. I should have come here earlier. Li Huaqing watched this scene quietly. He was silent for a long time before he spoke softly. It's not too late. Li Tianlan looked at the military flag below and said calmly, "Thank you." Li Huaqing took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said, "Thank you for letting me come here. As the president of Zhongzhou State, it would be a sin for me to come here 1 minute late, let alone 1 day late. A hero's soul must not be desecrated." He looked at the hero square, which was so calm that it was almost frozen, and said in a deep voice, "I only know that many people here died unjustly." Li Tianlan said blandly, "They are the most elite soldiers of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State is the most powerful country in the world, so they are the most elite soldiers in the world. Such soldiers should die on the real battlefield in the fight with other forces. That's a worthy death." Li Huaqing did not speak. Li Tianlan's tone was low. "But some of them are not. They did die in the war. But in the war, some people forgot their position. Mr. President, does it make sense to die like this?" Li Huaqing still did not speak. He could not express his opinion. The Wang family of Beihai had a strong foundation. However, the Devil Troop had always been the deepest hidden trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. No one could even have definite evidence to prove that the Devil Troop did exist. But there was no doubt that they were powerful. The trial day happened overnight. The Devil Troop seriously injured Raphael, the commander of the Dark Knights, Situt Sangyue, destroyed the holy punishment of Void, and killed Kasrater, the god of war of Star State. No matter what the process was, the results and achievements were real. They were extremely brilliant. Everyone was shocked by the incredible combat capability of the Devil Troop. But only a few people recalled that when the Devil Troop created such a result that night, how many troops and allies of Zhongzhou State died in the hands of the Devil Troop. But there was no evidence. Even now, no one could prove that the Devil Troop belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. On the surface, Wang Tianzong was imprisoned by Li Tianlan in the office of the president that night. The power of the Wang family of Beihai did not appear on any side of the battlefield. Under such circumstances, even if Li Huaqing was dissatisfied, how could he express his opinion? Li Tianlan did not expect Li Huaqing to express his opinion. He just looked ahead and said calmly, "I will investigate it to the end. These are my soldiers. As long as I am alive, I will give them an explanation. My position is in Zhongzhou State and the Snowdance Corps. I will make anyone who targets the Snowdance Corps pay a heavy price." Li Huaqing subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong stood aside, looking as usual. Li Tianlan did not say much and walked to the huge military flag in the square. Behind the three of them, more and more people appeared. Men and women, old and young, there were nearly hundreds of people. These were the members of the delegation brought by Li Huaqing this time, and they would also become the backbone of dividing the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries. Their achievements today were inextricably linked to the sacrifices of the Snowdance Corps. It was reasonable for them to come. On the other side of the crowd, Riker led a group of high-level officials of Wulan State and quietly watched Li Tianlan, who was getting closer and closer. Riker, who now held the power of the president as the prime minister, had a complicated look in his eyes. Looking at the ashes under the military flag at Li Tianlan, and at the countless monuments on the hero square around him, he suddenly felt sad. Not for Zhongzhou State, not for the Snowdance Corps, but for himself and Wulan State. Maybe there was no Wulan State anymore. The real Wulan State would become a thing of the past from today on. Just like this hero square, the legends would be forgotten little by little. This place would become the resting place of new heroes, the land of heroes of Zhongzhou State. Maybe in a few months or years, the stories on every monument here would disappear, and some well-known heroic deeds would be erased from the textbooks of Wulan State. The heroic deeds of the Snowdance Corps would appear in new textbooks and in various media and public opinions. In another 20 or 30 years, these ashes would become real heroes, and the heroes who really belonged to Wulan State would be completely annihilated. It was so cruel. In a real invasion, the losers would be robbed not only of their interests but also of their culture, traditions, ideas, and even beliefs. Everything would be obliterated, replaced, and completely subverted silently and quietly. Riker walked to Li Tianlan's side and said with some difficulty, "Your Highness, shall we start now?" Li Tianlan nodded. Riker turned around and made a gesture. In front of the flagpole in the center of the square, Cool Breeze, who was holding the flag of the Snowdance Corps, suddenly raised the flag in his hand. The flag slowly rose in drifting cloud's hand. The national anthem of Zhongzhou State resounded throughout the hero square, throughout Reki City, and throughout Wulan State. At this moment, in every city in every corner of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, schools, businesses, governments, everyone was mourning and praying. The lingering national anthem was loud and passionate. The elites of the Snowdance Corps in the square moved. The huge military flag on the ground was lifted little by little. The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps carefully picked up the urns one by one and put them into the pit dug nearby. The content of the monument on the square would be gradually replaced, and the lives of all the victims would be engraved on the monument. Li Tianlan and even Li Huaqing picked up the cinerary casket and gently put it in. The wind and rain continued. The singing became more and more majestic. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the Snowdance Corps raised their guns at the same time. The sound of gunfire roared in the city and surged into the sky. Li Tianlan, dressed in a marshal's uniform, was the first to pick up the shovel and silently buried the earth in the roar of gunfire. The national anthem slowly stopped. The sound of gunfire disappeared. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps began to gather together again. The military song that once belonged to the Border Control Corps sounded in the square. The tune was leisurely, not sad, only a touch of pride and nostalgia. There were new graves everywhere in the hero square. Perhaps a long time later, the new graves here would also become flat and become a square again. But as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, as long as the Li family was still there, it would always be the most sacred place in the whole of Wulan State and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. In the singing, the old era of Wulan State was completely buried. Li Huaqing, with a solemn face, raised his hand to salute. All the soldiers of the Snowdance Corps raised their hands to salute at the same time. Wang Tianzong also raised his hand. Only Li Tianlan didn't. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan slowly took a step forward. There was a vast expanse of new graves. His eyes were in a trance for a moment and his knees bent slightly. In the eyes of the world, he knelt down in front of the new graves. In an instant, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Snowdance Corps suddenly fell silent. Li Huaqing's face changed slightly and he subconsciously said, "Marshal Li, what are you doing?" Wang Tianzong's eyes had narrowed tightly. Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "As I said, some brothers here died unjustly. Today, I swear in front of all the brothers that some people have to pay the price for doing something wrong. I will seek justice for them and let them die a worthy death." He lowered his body and his head hit the rain-soaked floor heavily. Once, twice, 3 times. Heaven and earth were silent. All the soldiers of the Snowdance Corps looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, there was no Li Huaqing or Wang Tianzong in their eyes. There was only the figure kneeling and kowtowing. That was their marshal. Li Tianlan kowtowed 3 times heavily and slowly got up. Wang Tianzong's face suddenly changed. He raised his head and looked around. Li Tianlan straightened up. As if heaven and earth corresponded, light suddenly appeared in the dark sky. The quiet light enveloped the whole square. It was a riot of colors. The light appeared from all directions and gathered toward Li Tianlan crazily. Li Tianlan raised his head and was in a daze. He subconsciously stretched out his palm. The outstretched palm seemed to be pressed down by something in the nothingness. In an instant, the colorful light surged and shot wildly. Endless colorful light rushed out of the light and went straight up into the sky. The wind and rain all over the sky dissipated. Li Tianlan stood there. His hand grasped a rainbow, vast and boundless, incomparably dazzling. It was like a miracle. Chapter 553. Even if Wulan State and even Reki City disappeared from the world a long time later, the scene in the Hero Square on the afternoon of August 23 would leave its own color in the long history of the flow of time. The colorful light surged wantonly, almost covering the entire square. The rainbow connecting the heaven and the earth bloomed in Li Tianlan's hands. At this moment, his whole body was shining. This was a miracle. It would also become a legend in the future. Everyone was staring at this scene in a daze. The light that covered the heavy rain was extremely gorgeous, mysterious, and full of sharp majesty. No one could explain such a scene. Because of the unknown, everyone was in awe. Was it a blessing from heaven? Was it destiny? Was it destiny? This scene, which was filled with a mysterious flavor, filled everyone's heart. Apart from shock, it brought them more shock. Wang Tianzong did not look at the rainbow in Li Tianlan's hands. His body turned slowly and he stared intently in all directions. Naturally, he would not think that these lights were a gift from heaven. The light was still sharp in the slight flow. All the light was sword light. The sword light was sharp but did not hurt people. It silently spread all over the square. This was not something that a human could do at all. Wang Tianzong was sure of this. He could not do it himself and no one could do it. Everything in front of him was like the light of a sword itself. If such a sword existed, what kind of sword would it be? Wang Tianzong frowned. The sword light kept lingering in his sight. He seemed to detect a familiar taste, but it was hard to describe. He glanced at the Snowdance Corps around him. The Snowdance Corps was silent. Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. At this moment, there was no one in their eyes, not even the sword light. From Wang Tianzong's sight, the eyes of the Snowdance Corps were all without the slightest rational fanaticism and firmness. Wang Tianzong's heart sank. In the end, he remained silent. At the same time, Wang Tianzong was silent, but Gu Xingyun, who was far away in Zhongzhou State, could not help bursting out. Preposterous. Simply preposterous. What's the meaning of this? Li Tianlan is the commander of the Snowdance Corps and the marshal of Zhongzhou State. The Snowdance Corps is the elite corps of Zhongzhou State, not the private army of the Li family. Why does he kneel? Why does he kneel? Was he qualified? Buying people's hearts, building up troops in Eastern Europe and having wild ambitions, you should be punished. In the cold and spacious hall of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun looked at the picture on TV and roared hysterically. His eyes were scarlet, and he stared at Li Tianlan as if he wanted to swallow him alive. To win people's hearts, that bitch Qin Weibai is helping him behind the scenes. If he kneels down together with her, it's impossible for us to fight for the Snowdance Corps. Gu Qianchuan stood beside Gu Xingyun with a pale face and said in a gloomy tone. After he escaped from Beijiang, he did not return to Kunlun City until yesterday. After the battle with Li Tianlan, the injuries he had suppressed relapsed in Beijiang. Now Gu Qianchuan was not even as good as Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun stared at the TV and was silent. Li Tianlan's kneeling was completely inappropriate. Through the TV, Gu Xingyun didn't know what Li Tianlan said, but no matter what he said, his kneeling seemed to have ulterior motives in the eyes of others. However, the colorful light that rose into the sky later gave this matter a great mythical color. It was not until this moment that Gu Xingyun finally noticed something from Li Tianlan's every move. That was luck. Li Tianlan's every move, everything, and all the results represented the majestic and almost irresistible luck. Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan looked at each other and saw deep helplessness in each other's eyes. "Do you still have strength left?" Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. Gu Xingyun was stunned, and then he shook his head with a bitter smile. "What's the point?" The moment Li Tianlan knelt down, Gu Xingyun really had a desperate desire to kill him. His kneeling made the Snowdance Corps completely surrender. But in the end, no matter how strong the Snowdance Corps was, there were less than 20,000 people now. What made Gu Xingyun most nervous was the signal brought by Li Tianlan's kneeling and the relationship between him and the Dongqing clan. Now there was definite news that the Dongqing clan had completely put its future on Li Tianlan. Even Zhou Yuanshan, who was likely to reach the top, would wholeheartedly assist Li Tianlan. If Zhou Yuanshan reached the top 20 years later, he could guarantee the prestige of the giant group for decades to come. But if Li Tianlan became the chosen one, he could make the Dongqing clan the second Wang family of Beihai. The Dongqing clan naturally knew which was more important. Li Tianlan's kneeling showed his attitude toward the Dongqing clan, which was undoubtedly what many people in the giant group liked. It also meant that it would be smoother for Li Tianlan to take over the authority of Dongqing Wudi in the future. A Li family that controlled the giant group might not be as powerful as the Li family in its heyday, but its strength was directly related to Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan now had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. What if he officially broke through to the Invincible Realm in a few years? With the potential and combat capability that Li Tianlan showed now, once he officially entered the Invincible Realm, Gu Xingyun did not dare to say that he would be his opponent even without stabilizing his realm. Gu Qianchuan asked him if he still had strength left at this time, undoubtedly to let Gu Xingyun kill him at all costs. "Even if I have strength left, can I really sneak into Reki City and kill him? After all, he is the marshal of Zhongzhou State," Gu Xingyun said. "Why not?" Gu Qianchuan said quietly. Gu Xingyun raised his head in astonishment. In his sight, Gu Qianchuan's pale face was calm. Gu Xingyun also understood. Why couldn't he kill him? Now Gu Xingyun was an expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm. Even if he was seriously injured, his realm was there. As long as he had strength left, he could kill him. As long as Gu Xingyun was willing to pay the price. The god of war of Zhongzhou State killed the marshal of Zhongzhou State. In any case, Gu Xingyun could not escape the responsibility. Even if he did not have to pay with his life, he was bound to be imprisoned for life. But if Li Tianlan died, Kunlun City would have time. Even if Kunlun City lost Gu Xingyun, it still had Gu Qianchuan. Kunlun City had been rooted in Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years, and the Special Warfare Group had gradually become mature. As long as there were another 20 years, even if the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State were completely neutral, Kunlun City would have the confidence to protect itself in front of a behemoth like the Wang family of Beihai. Therefore, Gu Qianchuan asked Gu Xingyun to sacrifice himself. For Kunlun City. It's a matter of life and death. Gu Qianchuan laughed at himself. He had no strength left and his realm was not high enough. Even if he could move, he would not be Li Tianlan's opponent. Gu Xingyun was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said, "I can't move." Gu Qianchuan looked at him and did not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the light in his hand. Others were shocked, angry, admiring and thoughtful. But his whole consciousness had been completely occupied by the sword light in front of him. The sword light with extremely pure sword intent wrapped him up. The light formed by the sword intent and the sword chi appeared in an extremely calm manner. It was completely unfolded in front of him. It was so strange and so familiar. It seemed familiar. Li Tianlan felt the emotion. It was light and strong emotion. It was joy, intimacy, excitement, approval, docility, and dependence. The sword light in front of him seemed to be alive, constantly jumping in Li Tianlan's hand. He had a sword in his hand. Li Tianlan could not see what the sword looked like, but he could clearly feel that the sword seemed to whisper something in his hand. "This is the real peerless sword." Wang Tianzong's voice sounded beside him. Sword Emperor, who had been incompatible with the Snowdance Corps, walked to Li Tianlan's side and looked at the light in his hand seriously. There was a little joy in his tone. "What do you see?" Li Tianlan asked softly. "Nothingness." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "But it's very real." He could not see the sword either. But between nothingness and reality, what he felt was the purest sword intent. A real sword should be like this. So should martial arts. A real sword should be alive and have a soul. It could perfectly carry anyone in any level of sword energy. The invincible sword. Wang Qianzong's tone was calm. It stands here and doesn't need to be controlled. Its sword energy is already equivalent to a peak invincible realm expert. Li Qianlan's expression became a little strange. Now in the whole dark world, there were only 5 confirmed experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Qianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, and Arsis. Should this sword of nothingness be added now? If this sword was ranked on the divine list, wouldn't it be ranked above Gu Xingyun? Li Tianlan did not find it funny. Instead he felt a little cold. So, what kind of sword was it? Who made it? The sword in nothingness seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The sword light trembled slightly in his hand, with a little grievance and dissatisfaction, like a child acting coquettishly. Li Tianlan was a little speechless. Wang Qianzong took a deep breath. He also did not know what kind of sword it was, but he was sure that even if the coldness of 9 states was successfully cast with the human emperor, its spirituality would not reach this level. Your Excellency, can you show up? Wang Qianzong looked at the void with a serious expression and asked. His tone was very respectful. Not because of its strength but because the sword itself was a miracle. With this sword, no weapon in the world could shake its position as the first divine weapon, whether it was the murderous weapon, listen to the sea, or even the coldness of 9 states. The sword in nothingness did not respond, nor did it have any emotion. Wang Qianzong waited quietly. With his current strength he might be able to try to forcibly control this sword. But what could a sword equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm do even if he controlled it? It did not belong to him. If he really held it in his hand, not only could he not use it, but it was equivalent to carrying a time bomb. The colorful light slightly fluctuated in Li Tianlan's hand. Some sword light wrapped around Wang Qianzong's body, with faint emotions. That emotion was not hostility, killing intent, or disgust. There was intimacy but with a touch of complexity and helplessness. The sword whistling in the void seemed to be a sigh. All the emotions slowly disappeared, completely converged and returned to nothingness. At this moment it was no longer a life but a sword, a pure sword. The sword was in Li Tianlan's hand. Wherever the long sword pointed, the tip of the sword pointed. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his palm. The 7-colored radiance that filled the sky instantly boiled. In the void, the sword continued to rise, faster and faster, disappearing into the distance in an instant. The 7-colored light slowly dissipated. The wind and rain did not fall for a while. There was no sunlight between the heavens and the earth. It was murky and pure. What do you think? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He and Wang Qianzong were enemies, but in the field of sword intent, only Li Tianlan was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Qianzong. Even if they were enemies, they would be lonely when they didn't see each other. Wang Qianzong felt the direction where the sword light disappeared and was silent for a long time. He thought of the coldness of 9 states cast by the Wang family of Beihai. The coldness of 9 states was not as good as this sword. It was inserted into the spirituality, but it was lacking in the sword qi. This was because compared to the one who had just left, the coldness of the 9 states was only born from the heart. It did not have enough spirituality or sword qi. If he became a chosen one and swept through the dark world with the coldness of the 9 states, when the coldness of the 9 states fully matured, it might not be much weaker than that sword. The most important thing was, Wang Qianzong only wanted a sword. He wanted a sword that could bear his sword intent. The coldness of the 9 states could do it. The other things were no longer important. He shook his head and said slowly, after all, it's just a foreign object. The constantly converging sword light went all the way to the west and landed on the West Mountain. The so-called West Mountain was a low hillside that surrounded the Hero Square on several sides. Standing on the hillside, one could clearly see everything on the Hero Square. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been rumored to have fallen and had never appeared even on the date of death and the trial day, stood on the hillside and looked at Li Tianlan in the distance in silence. Qin Weibai, who was wearing a gray windbreaker, stood side by side with the master of Samsara Palace, looking more and more beautiful. Flaming fire stood behind them, as quiet as a statue. The sword light that kept returning to nothingness was getting closer and closer. In the nothingness, the sword body hovered around the 3 of them for a moment and passed by flaming fire. It seemed to hesitate slightly and finally became completely quiet. It's too early for you to make a move. the master of Samsara Palace said softly. Have you ever thought that it's not necessarily a good thing to believe in him too early? Why not? Qin Weibai said with a smile. This kind of timing and occasion is the best. The master of Samsara Palace did not speak for a moment. Her figure was tall and plump. Under the black cloak was an expressionless mask. She was not ugly, but standing in front of Qin Weibai, who was as ethereal as a fairy, she looked ordinary and almost bloated. They were a pair of sisters. When the two stood together, everyone's attention would be attracted by Qin Weibai and thus ignore the master of Samsara Palace. Even if she was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who stood at the peak of the dark world. Qin Weibai looked at her silent figure. Her eyes were in a trance and she was lost in thought for a moment. You're not reconciled? The master of Samsara Palace suddenly said. Her voice sounded a little low under the mask. No. Qin Weibai's voice became cold. The master of Samsara Palace seemed unwilling to continue this topic. She looked at Li Tianlan in the distance and said blandly, You want to mold him into a supreme god, but it's too early now. He's not strong enough. A god is perfect and supreme without any flaws. Now he's still too weak. Have you ever thought that the higher you push him, the more he can't afford any failure? It's true for him and it's also true for his subordinates. What's the matter? Qin Weibai asked back. Does it matter? Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace took a deep breath. Wang Tianzong, deity, Lin Fengting, and even me who isn't stronger than him? The chaos in East Island isn't over yet. Now. Qin Weibai suddenly interrupted the master of Samsara Palace. It's over. At least for him it's over. The next final battle has nothing to do with him. The master of Samsara Palace couldn't speak for a moment. Qin Weibai took 2 steps forward and opened her hands, as if she was embracing the sky. Her figure was so delicate, so perfect. I could have changed a lot of things. She said softly, Of course I also changed a lot of things, but I'm not a savior. I just want my man to go higher and make his path easier. From the very beginning, even before the final battle of Changdao in our plan, Tianlan wouldn't be in the final battle of Eastern Europe. Tianlan will not be in the final battle in Eastern Europe. He has done a good job in Eastern Europe. What belongs to him is over. But you know him. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly, In the final battle, both you and I will be there. Tianlan won't stay out of it. She looked at Qin Weibai's back and her voice was as sharp as a knife. You don't have any means to persuade him. So, how are you going to let him leave the battlefield of the final battle? Qin Weibai's figure trembled violently. He could have left. Qin Weibai's voice suddenly sounded a little agitated. If everything goes well, in a few days he will leave with Li Huaqing, return to Zhongzhou State, and go to Tiannan to develop. When he hears the news it will be too late. But Zhang Shangyu is missing. The master of Samsara Palace said, Whether he intentionally disappeared or not, the direct result of his disappearance is that Li Tianlan can't leave Eastern Europe for the time being. His disappearance directly ruined your plan. Qin Weibai's body trembled slightly. So, how are you going to keep him out of the battlefield? The master of Samsara Palace asked more and more directly, You do it? Or me? In an instant, Qin Weibai's face lost all the blood and became extremely miserable. I said, her voice was light as if she had lost all her soul. I won't say sorry for the second time in my life. So, the master of Samsara Palace asked. There was silence. The silence seemed to have passed for a moment, but it also seemed to be as long as a lifetime. Qin Weibai's voice finally sounded. I'll do it. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly with mixed feelings. The Snowdance Corps in the distance began to leave the square. In sight there were crowds of people everywhere. The master of Samsara Palace hesitated for a moment, walked to Qin Weibai and patted her on the shoulder. Qin Weibai lowered her head and no longer looked at Li Tianlan or the Snowdance Corps. Have you ever thought about what he would be like without you and me in this world? The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance and she said absent-mindedly, What can he do? Without you and me there will be others to replace us. If he doesn't meet me he will still enter the Sky Academy. Maybe there will be no final battle of East Island, but he will still rise quickly in the Sky Academy, and then his identity will be exposed. She said quietly in a sad voice, Then he may enter the Wang family of Beihai because he can't bear the pressure he can't bear at all. He will find his own way to be the chosen one and sweep the dark world with the divine weapon given to him by the Wang family of Beihai. He will meet Phoenix Pavilion, 1 or 2 women he loves deeply, and they also love him deeply, but they are destined to die with each other. Just like Li Guangtu, the old things keep reincarnating. He will die under the sword of his woman, and the Li family will disappear completely. His woman may hide her identity, or take revenge for him with his sword. That may be the era of women. The master of Samsara Palace listened to her quietly without saying a word. The former is sad and the latter is boring. Finally, Qin Weibai concluded. Boring. The master of Samsara Palace's voice was calm. It's really boring. Qin Weibai nodded. Let's go to see Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace's body hesitated for a moment. Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes. A gray lady's trench coat, a white scarf, a white cotton shirt, black straight pants and high heels. She never dressed herself up, but any clothes on her had a kind of dazzling brilliance. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said, "Let's change clothes and go." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. Okay, let's go back to the hotel first. The Manlisai Hotel has been completely cordoned off. It's the place where Wulan State arranged President Li Huaqing to live. I've booked a room in a nearby hotel. Flaming Fire, who had been silent, suddenly became angry. She took a step forward and looked at Qin Weibai. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Qin Weibai nodded and said casually, "Then let's go there directly." Flaming Fire nodded slightly. The car is already at the foot of the mountain. The three of them slowly went down the mountain along the mountain path. Along the way, Flaming Fire wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Qin Weibai didn't seem to notice Flaming Fire's state. Her steps were light and weak. The master of Samsara Palace quietly reached out and grabbed Qin Weibai's arm. She looked at Flaming Fire and asked aloud, "What do you want to say?" Flaming Fire glanced at the master of Samsara Palace and ignored her. The master of Samsara Palace narrowed her eyes slightly and snorted softly. A black car made in Eastern Europe was parked at the foot of the mountain. The three of them got in the car in silence. Flaming Fire sat in the driver's seat, silent and motionless. Finally, Qin Weibai looked at her and said slowly, "What do you want to ask? What clothes do you want to change, boss?" Flaming Fire hesitated for a while and finally asked directly. "Changing clothes is changing clothes. Have you prepared a lot of clothes?" Qin Weibai asked curiously. Flaming Fire turned to look at Qin Weibai's bright and crystal eyes and said stubbornly, "You know what I mean." She paused and continued, "I will never agree." Qin Weibai reached out and tidied the hair in front of Flaming Fire's forehead. She said softly, "Don't think too much." "I didn't think too much." Flaming Fire said quietly, "I just don't agree." She turned to look at the master of Samsara Palace and said with cold eyes, "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Flaming Fire sneered and said, "Do you deserve it?" "Enough." Qin Weibai suddenly opened her mouth and said coldly. Flaming Fire's fierce momentum stagnated for a moment and finally fell silent. "I don't want to go to the hotel." After a long time, Flaming Fire said softly. For some reason, her eyes were slightly red. "You have to let Tianlan see it." Qin Weibai said softly. She touched Flaming Fire's head and said, "Drive." Flaming Fire was silent. From Mormons to Reki City, they took a private plane and didn't stop. The reason for all of this was actually so simple. It didn't matter whether they missed her or not. The important thing was to let Tianlan see it. Look at her. Look at her. And her. Chapter 554. When Eastern Europe was approaching the end, the final maneuver of the two academies in Zhongzhou State finally came to an end. After the maneuvers, the statistics of credits were handed over to the presidents of the two academies as soon as possible. The presidents of the two academies reported the credits to Kunlun City. After the verification, Kunlun City would distribute a series of rewards and treatments to each force and each young student according to the credits. Then it was the graduation ceremony. The high-level officials and teachers of the two academies would spend a few months summarizing the teaching situation of this year, exchanging experiences, re-rating the strength of each teacher, transferring personnel, rewarding teachers with outstanding achievements in the past 3 years, and formulating the teaching direction and focus of the two academies for the next year. Then it was the annual leave and a short vacation. After the vacation, when the personnel of the two academies were completely stable, the two academies announced the enrollment requirements of the new year. Kunlun City and the Army headquarters jointly issued a document, which was transmitted to the entire military world and the special warfare system. Any young elites who met the enrollment requirements and were interested in entering the two academies would choose the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy. Then the teachers of the two academies would lead teams to various places for the assessment. After the assessment, the new classes of the two academies would officially start again at the end of March or the beginning of April next year, around the Qingming festival. To some extent, the final result of the last maneuver of the two academies directly affected the direction of the new students' choice and the support of the military and the special warfare system for the two academies. So Zhuang Huayang was very busy. The Sky Academy really shone in this year and completely left the Deep Sea Academy behind. Li Tianlan's rise directly broke the pattern of the young generation and even the entire Zhongzhou state experts. The Deep Sea Academy originally had Jiang Shangyu, Dongqing Rushi and Song Xiai. From the beginning, the Deep Sea Academy's glory was far stronger than that of the Sky Academy. But Li Tianlan defeated 3 young chosen ones and many elites in one fell swoop in the final maneuver, which also completely shattered the pride of the Deep Sea Academy. From the beginning to the end of the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace only participated in the team maneuver on the first day, and only Li Tianlan participated. But the credits accumulated by the East Emperor Palace had more than twice that of the second place, the 3000 World. The East Emperor Palace was the force of the Sky Academy, and all this was naturally the glory of the Sky Academy. As the Dean of the Sky Academy, within 24 hours after the maneuver, Zhuang Huayang had been commended many times by the Parliament, the Cabinet, the military and Kunlun City. After all, the total credits of the Sky Academy in this maneuver had surpassed that of the Deep Sea Academy. With such a brilliant achievement, the Parliament of Zhongzhou State almost unanimously approved the appointment of Zhuang Huayang to continue to serve in the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang naturally knew the reason. From this moment on, although he was still the backbone of the academics, he had already stepped on the boat of the East Emperor Palace. On the surface he stayed in the Sky Academy to commend his achievements, but there was more than one kind of commendation. With his age and military rank, the high-level officials of the army headquarters in Kunlun City had talked to him before, hoping that he could serve in the Ministry of National Defense and serve as the deputy minister after this term. In fact, it was tantamount to giving him an idle job in retirement. Of course, this retirement position was what everyone dreamed of, and it might not be worse than now. However, after thinking for a long time, Zhuang Huayang finally expressed the idea of continuing to shine in the Sky Academy. His care for Li Tianlan was well known. Nowadays, the Academy, the Giant Group and Sai City were very close, and the core figure was Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan went all the way up in the future, Zhuang Huayang sitting in this position was unlikely to step down. Instead, he would always hold the power of the Sky Academy and attract talents for the East Emperor Palace. The Academy would also intervene in the special warfare system with the rise of the East Emperor Palace's status. The cooperation between the two sides was a complete win-win situation. Zhuang Huayang might have to wait until the East Emperor Palace was strong enough to decide the sensitive position of the Dean of the Sky Academy. But at that time, Li Huaqing had already left the office and gave up the supreme power. The academics, which was in a dormant period, could negotiate with the powerful East Emperor Palace on this issue and find a new direction of cooperation, such as the current governor of Jiangxia, Zhou Yuanshan. Knowing his position clearly, Zhuang Huayang naturally knew what he should do. As soon as the maneuver ended, he sent a notice to the East Emperor Palace and invited them to return to the Sky Academy to confirm the future development direction. This matter could even be said to be the most important thing for Zhuang Huayang. For the East Emperor Palace it was also extremely important. The sun shone in the spacious office. Zhuang Huayang held a list in his hand and looked at it attentively. Sitting opposite Zhuang Huayang, Li Baidian calmly watched Zhuang Huayang frown. After a long time, Zhuang Huayang put down the list in his hand and said slowly, "You actually want all of these people?" There were thousands of students in the two academies, but there were only hundreds of elites who could really enter the eyes of the major forces. The East Emperor Palace naturally had no right to be picky. As a new force, even with Li Tianlan in charge, the scope of the East Emperor Palace's selection of talents was still extremely narrow. The graduates of the two academies were their biggest market. This market was indeed very large. In the eyes of Kunlun City, there were nearly 100 students who applied to join the East Emperor Palace. In the eyes of Wang Qinglei, this list had already exceeded 100 people. But looking at the entire Sky Academy this year, There were more than 860 students who wanted to join the East Emperor Palace and had submitted applications to the political departments of the two academies. The East Emperor Palace was also generous enough. They wanted to accept more than 800 people without leaving a single one. Zhuang Huayang was a little worried. He took a deep look at Li Beidian and said slowly, "Do you know what this means?" Li Beidian nodded with a smile. In the case of Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe, he had full authority to represent the East Emperor Palace. This decision was made after many internal discussions and communication with various parties. More than 800 people. This is just the combat capability. The East Emperor Palace accepted them. In fact, it is equivalent to accepting their relatives and even their families. There is no shortage of experts on this list, and they also have vassals around them. So if all of them are counted, the East Emperor Palace has accepted at least more than 1,000 students this time. Including their families, the number of people in the East Emperor Palace will even exceed 5,000. Zhuang Huayang said in a deep voice. Any new force had to develop slowly. Even if it was a big gamble, there must be a limit. The current behavior of the East Emperor Palace was completely crazy. To accept so many people in one breath, it needed great financial resources, future potential, and a stable chain of interests. Now the East Emperor Palace had nothing but potential. Headmaster, we have indeed considered this problem, but at present, it seems that it is not impossible to solve. The new East Emperor Palace will give everyone a huge surprise. Li Beidian said calmly, as for this list, only about 1/10 of the people really enter the headquarters of the East Emperor Palace. The East Emperor Palace will set up a new branch in the near future, and most of the people on the list will develop in the branch. Zhuang Huayang stared at Li Beidian. He even thought that the young man in front of him was crazy. The East Emperor Palace had just been established, and it had not yet stabilized. How could he want to set up a branch? The corner of his mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Headmaster, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Although we have graduated, we will always be your students. Li Beidian laughed. Zhuang Huayang snorted coldly, stood up and said, "It's nonsense. The East Emperor Palace is in the limelight now. The most important thing to do at present is to keep a low profile. The East Emperor Palace has accepted so many talents at once. Do you really think that other forces have no temper? Bodhisattva? Well, your foundation is not stable and you start to set up a branch. What kind of institution is this branch? Who will be responsible? Do you think you don't have enough shortcomings? The new branch is called Nightmare Corps. It is probably a strengthened regiment. The East Emperor Palace is the first in this maneuver. With Tianlan's position, we want to fight for A-class authorization for Nightmare Corps," Li Beidian said. Zhuang Huayang took a deep breath and shook his head with a wry smile. Nightmare Corps was also a special warfare legion. The strengthened regiment would have about 3,000 people, and the commander's military rank was at least a colonel. These were easy to deal with. The key was A-class authorization. There were 4 levels of authorization in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. B-class authorization was common and could be regarded as the basic and middle level. Most small special warfare agencies were B-class authorization. A-class authorization was already a behemoth. They had the power to expand freely in a certain province. The special operations bureaus of each province were all A-class authorization. Originally, the current status of the East Emperor Palace should also give them A-class authorization. To get A-class authorization, the strength must be at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general or above. Li Tianlan was now the marshal of Zhongzhou State. After the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, he returned to China and handed over the position of the commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he was still the marshal. Therefore, the new East Emperor Palace would get S-class authorization, which was on the same level as the regional special warfare headquarters. Its status was equivalent to that of a member of parliament. Above the S-class was the X-class. In the entire Zhongzhou State, only Kunlun City had the X-class authorization and could expand freely within the territory of Zhongzhou State. In the current state, an S-class authorization was enough for the East Emperor Palace to digest. Li Beidian even wanted an A-class authorization? Let's not talk about whether you can get the A-class authorization. Even if you get it, who in your East Emperor Palace is qualified to be the commander of this Nightmare Corps? Zhuang Huayang asked seriously. Marshal Li can't do it himself, can he? The strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the military rank of lieutenant general. Li Beidian was now the second most important person in the East Emperor Palace, but his realm was still some distance from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and his qualifications were not enough to be promoted to lieutenant general. The Li family, Sai City, and Dongqing clan could provide such people, but it was unlikely to get the A-class authorization with these people. In the entire East Emperor Palace, only Li Wangxing, the lieutenant general of Black Tortoise in Zhongzhou State, was barely qualified. But he was just barely qualified. His military rank was enough, but his strength was slightly poor. And the position of the Terracotta Army could not be easily given up. As for the other one, Dongqing Rushi, her strength was enough, but her strength was not strong enough to be promoted as an exception as Li Tianlan's. And to say the least, even if Li Wangxing and Dongqing Rushi were promoted, their strength was not enough to quell the controversy. At that time, there would be many people who were dissatisfied and challenged. Once they failed, the entire East Emperor Palace would be affected. At present, we have found the candidate for the commander of the Nightmare Corps. He has confirmed that he will join the East Emperor Palace, and I believe that his strength can be promoted and fully recognized by Zhongzhou State. No one will be bored enough to challenge him. Li Baidian said seriously. Zhuang Huayang thought about it with some doubts and asked, "Where is he?" "He is still with Tianlan in Eastern Europe," Li Baidian said. Zhuang Huayang thought about the young expert who was now with Li Tianlan and said uncertainly, "Dongqing Rushi?" Li Baidian shook his head. Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State, Lin Yuxian, the young master of the Lin clan. Is he qualified? This chapter is purely coded by mobile phone. There is a power outage at home. We said that there would be no electricity at 10 o'clock. If there are any typos, please bear with it. Chapter 555. There was some doubt in Zhuang Huayang's eyes, but it soon turned into surprise. Li Baiqian's words contained too much information and represented too many things. Lin Clan, Zhuanyuantai, Zhongzhou State. Every word was the key of the key. This was also something that Zhongzhou State had been secretly looking forward to for a long time. The Lin clan lived in seclusion. They were far away in Switzerland and had almost never interfered in any affairs of the dark world. In this state, the Lin clan, in the era when experts at the peak of the invincible realm could almost represent everything, was absolutely worth the effort of any force to rope in. Zhongzhou State had also tried several times, but the Lin clan had never given any response. Now that Lin Yuxian joined the East Emperor Palace, it was absolutely a good start. He would serve as the commander of the Nightmare Army, so he must become a citizen of Zhongzhou State and even join the political party of Zhongzhou State. After all, he was the heir of the Lin clan. Even if the Lin clan allowed Lin Yuxian to develop a branch alone, the Lin clan was bound to change its attitude toward Zhongzhou State in the future because of his relationship with the Lin clan. If a behemoth like the Lin clan supported a country with the same voice, it was actually very troublesome. Support at all costs often meant that the supported country had to pay an unimaginable price. For example, no one could deny the great contribution that the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou State brought to Zhongzhou State. But the existence of the Wang family of Beihai often made Zhongzhou State seem very embarrassed. The young master of the Lin clan joined the East Emperor Palace, and the Lin clan had a very important branch in the country. At some point, if the Lin clan's position leaned toward Zhongzhou State, it would have a huge influence. In the eyes of Zhongzhou State, this was a real win-win situation. No wonder, Zhuang Huayang muttered to himself and suddenly asked with some uncertainty, "What did Lin Yuxian say?" He has already shown his attitude by going to Eastern Europe with Tianlan. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't get away from Eastern Europe, he might have come to meet the headmaster in person today. Li Baidian said with a smile. Zhuang Huayang took a deep look at him and didn't say anything. He understood Lin Yuxian's attitude and naturally understood Li Baiqian's subtext. Didn't it mean that if Lin Yuxian was free, he would represent the East Emperor Palace to discuss the list with Zhuang Huayang today? In other words, in the future sequence of the East Emperor Palace, the first was Li Tianlan, and the real second was Lin Yuxian. Judging from Li Baiqian's current attitude, he wasn't dissatisfied with this. There were only a few corps in the East Emperor Palace. After Li Tianlan, it was Li Baidian and Dongqing Rushi. They were all experts who were likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi would not fight for anything. If Li Baidian was willing to give up the position of number 2, Ning Qianqing, who was slightly less talented, and Su Chu would not do anything. Du Hanin belonged to Sai City, and Wang Yuatong was in an awkward position. In this way, as long as Li Baidian did not fight for it, the core lineup of the East Emperor Palace would be extremely stable in the future. For anyone looking forward to the future of the East Emperor Palace, this was good news. I will communicate with the chief immediately. East Emperor Palace will probably get the authorization of the Nightmare Army at the graduation ceremony. Zhuang Huayang said without hesitation, full of confidence. If the commander of the Nightmare Army was not Lin Yuxian, he would not be so confident, and he might not even report it to the higher-ups. But if it was Lin Yuxian, all the problems would be solved. Zhongzhou State was completely willing to make an exception to promote Lin Yuxian. With the status of the Lin clan in the Dark World, Zhongzhou State was even willing to pay more. Kunlun City naturally would not like this appointment, but it was impossible to oppose it openly because it was useless even if it did. If Gu Xingyun really dared to say no, the whole Zhongzhou State, not to mention the counselors and directors, even the wealthy families who had various cooperation with the Lin clan would teach him what to focus on the overall situation. Li Beidian laughed. Before he came, he knew this would be the result. He pointed to the list in Zhuang Huayang's hand and said, "This? I'll arrange it." Zhuang Huayang waved his hand and looked at the list in his hand. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Among the hundreds of names, the oldest was already 31 years old, and the weakest had crossed the ice-condensing realm, which was the standard for graduation from the East Emperor Palace. Many of them were not geniuses, but there was still room for improvement. Conservatively speaking, the worst potential could reach the peak of the ice-condensing realm. From the ice-condensing realm to the fire-flaming realm, to the thunder-shocking realm, and to the half-step invincible realm. The starting point of the East Emperor Palace was unimaginably high, and it had formed its own talent echelon. If Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in a short time, the entire East Emperor Palace would become pivotal in the Dark World. Even now, as long as Li Tianlan came back, the East Emperor Palace could be regarded as a force that no one in Zhongzhou State could ignore. The most important thing was that it was just the beginning. 3 years later, with Li Tianlan's steady rise in Zhongzhou State, how many people would want to join the East Emperor Palace when the graduates of the two academies graduated again? And what realm would the people who joined the East Emperor Palace be in 3 years? Zhuang Huayang was a little emotional. Vaguely, he seemed to see a surging tide rolling over from a distance, with a general trend of crushing everything, constantly subverting all the orders of the old era. The younger generation will surpass us in time, he sighed softly. Headmaster, you flatter me. Li Beidian smiled implicitly. If there's nothing else, I should go back. How could there be nothing else? Zhuang Huayang said helplessly, at the graduation ceremony, you have to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace. Marshal Li can't spare time to come back. Don't you support him? Speak. Li Beidian was stunned and then laughed. It's not my business. I'm not the one to speak on behalf of the East Emperor Palace at the graduation ceremony. Then who is it? Zhuang Huayang asked curiously. It's Yuetong. Li Beidian said calmly. The corner of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched violently as if he couldn't believe it. When the Sword Emperor of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan were at loggerheads in Eastern Europe, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai spoke on behalf of Li Tianlan. Is it Wang Yuetong? He couldn't help but ask again. Li Beidian shook his head and said, No, it's Yuetong. Wang Yuetong was climbing the mountain. The smooth mountain road of Mount Dibbing was getting farther and farther behind her. She walked quietly and didn't take a car. Instead, she observed the beautiful scenery around Mount Dibbing step by step. She didn't leave Mount Dibbing for a long time, but when she came back this time, she felt as if a lifetime had passed. She was a little thinner, but she looked more beautiful. She used to be stubborn and lively, but now she was strong and calm. In a short time, she seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. In other words, it was a leap from immaturity to maturity. She passed the mountainside and approached the top. There was an antique pavilion at the bottom of the mountain. In the summer, when flowers and plants were flourishing, the pavilion was located among the flowers and plants, vicissitudes and elegance. Summer Solstice was standing in the pavilion and looking at Wang Yuetong. Her eyes were full of helplessness and pity. Wang Yuetong's footsteps trembled slightly. She stopped and looked at Summer Solstice without saying anything. Why don't you take a car up? Summer Solstice came over and tidied her daughter's hair, asking softly. Wang Yuetong didn't say anything but just whispered, Mom, have you thought it through? Summer Solstice said softly, If you have, come back. I'll ask someone to help you tidy up your room. Wang Yuetong shook her head and whispered, I just want to come back to see you, Mom. I'll go back later. No matter where you are, you can only use it when you arrive at Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice's voice was gentle and soft, but extremely firm. Wang Yuetong bit her lip and didn't speak. Summer Solstice didn't seem to want to embarrass her daughter. She sighed softly, touched her short hair and whispered, "Do you miss me?" "Yes. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." "Is there something else?" "Of course, if you want me to ask your father to let Tianlan go, you'd better not ask. At this time I can't persuade him and I'm in no position to persuade him." "Oh." Wang Yuetong shook her head and smiled bitterly. "When I left here last time I made up my mind. No matter what, I won't embarrass my father in the future, nor will I embarrass him." Summer Solstice looked at Wang Yuetong quietly, and there was some understanding in her eyes. Neither side embarrassed her, so she was the only one who was embarrassed. "Don't you feel wronged?" Summer Solstice asked softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, "No." Summer Solstice was in a daze. She thought of the trial day in Eastern Europe. That night, even when the Snowdance Corps collapsed and Li Tianlan's life was at stake, Wang Yuetong didn't make a sound. She had never called Summer Solstice or Wang Tianzong. That night, Eastern Europe was turned upside down. That night, Zhongzhou state was turbulent. That night, Tian'an felt like a year. What was Wang Yuetong thinking about that night? Tianlan won't die this time. With his current position, at least in Eastern Europe this time, your father can't kill him. But silly girl, do you know that President Li Huaqing brought nearly 60 families to Eastern Europe this time? Most of them belong to the giant group. Even if a few people from other groups want to get benefits in Eastern Europe, they must get Li Tianlan's approval. Among them there are people from the Special Warfare Group. He will contact more and more people and his foundation will become more and more stable. In any case, this is what your father doesn't want to see. He can't do anything to Tianlan, but it doesn't mean that he can't do anything to those people. Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong's face turned pale for a moment, and then she shook her head and said, "Mom, I'm not here to listen to this." Xia Ji sighed again and said helplessly, "Well, what do you want to tell me?" "I'm here for the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy," Wang Yuetong said softly. Summer Solstice's face changed slightly. "At the graduation ceremony, Yuetong will speak on behalf of East Emperor Palace." Wang Yuetong's eyes were clear and firm. "Yuetong?" Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes. Wang Yuetong agreed and became more determined. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Yuetong's surname was neither Wang nor Li. Had he lost his surname after all? "Have you ever thought that if this goes on, one day you will have nowhere to go?" Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Yuetong shook her head and said softly, "No." Summer Solstice smiled bitterly. When she was about to speak, the entire Mount Dibing trembled for no reason. It was not an earthquake. The magnificent Mount Dibing trembled for a moment and then returned to normal. In an instant, the entire Mount Dibing was filled with sword energy. Endless sword energy stirred the space and came back from all directions on the ground. In the core area of the top of Mount Dibing, a space completely condensed by sword energy suddenly rushed to the sky. The world seemed to become dim. All the colors on Mount Dibing faded. Sword light lit up in the majestic sword energy. There was only black and white. The black and white sword light enveloped the entire Mount Dibing. The sky and the earth all became hazy for a while. Wang Yuetong was absent-minded for a moment. "This sword is called Coldness of 9 States." Summer Solstice's voice was faint. The black and white sword light flickered slightly. Under the sword light, a flame suddenly rose up. The flame was not blazing, but it kept burning. The color was extremely bright. Even in the black and white sword light, it was still extremely strong. For the first time, there was surprise in Summer Solstice's eyes. "It's Xingxiao," she said. "He broke through." End of this chapter. Chapter 556. Li Huaqing's time was indeed tight. Therefore, as soon as the memorial service ended, Zhongzhou State had already determined the time for the welcome dinner with Wulan State. This dinner, which was destined to divide up most of the property of Wulan State and even the 5 Eastern European countries, would be held tomorrow evening. At this time, it was enough for many important figures in Eastern Europe to come to Reki City, and it was also enough for Zhongzhou State and Wulan State to sign a series of agreements. This was the main purpose of Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. The dinner party had to be held after the signing of the agreement. Only in this way could Zhongzhou State be sure of what it had got and then negotiate with all the powerful families in Eastern Europe. Therefore, not only Li Huaqing was pressed for time, but Wulan State was also pressed for time. They had to finalize all the agreements on the last day. The agreements that were about to be signed largely represented the future of Wulan State. Rick seemed to be prepared. When the Snowdance Corps retreated, he had already arranged for someone to lead the delegation of Zhongzhou State to the hotel. As for Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing, and Wang Tianzong, they went directly to the office of the president, or to the place where Wang Tianzong was imprisoned. The new location of the office of the president will be about 9 kilometers away. The original location of the Caesar Hotel will become the new office of the president. This square will be expanded. I have communicated with Commander Cheng Huaining of the Arctic Ocean Command and reported to Minister Dongqing. Within 3 months, the Arctic Ocean Command will support the Snowdance Corps with a batch of armaments. With them here, Wulan State will be stable in the future. The black Hongqi was driving on the highway. Li Tianlan looked at the parade square outside the window and reported in a calm tone. At this time Riker was not in the car. Li Zhonghu drove in person so he could speak freely. Therefore Li Tianlan had no scruples and said straightforwardly, Zhongzhou State can be more ruthless. On this point, Riker has enough psychological preparation. After the agreement is signed there will be some details. I will talk to Riker then. Li Huaqing patted his shoulder and said gently, You've worked hard. Li Tianlan shook his head and said quietly, The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps are working hard. Of course. Li Huaqing nodded. Zhongzhou State will commend them collectively and improve their treatment. As for the martyrs who sacrificed themselves, I will inform the military headquarters to increase their compensation. We can't let these heroes die with worry. Listening to Li Huaqing's habitual official tone, Li Tianlan was silent for a while and did not speak. What about the rotation of the Snowdance Corps? Wang Tianzong, who was silent, suddenly kept his composure. He asked. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Tianzong. He said blandly, The current plan is that the rotation time is 3 years. The members of the Snowdance Corps are real iron-blooded men. 3 years later they will return home. Li Zhonghu suddenly opened his mouth and said, We have consulted all the experts in advance of a warrior. In my opinion they are willing to stay here for the next 3 years. What about 3 years later? Wang Tianzong continued asking. Li Tianlan glanced at him, smiled and said nothing. The meaning was obvious. Since Li Tianlan, Reki City would naturally be in the hands of the Li family. The Li family did not mind other people coming to take a share, but they must abide by the order of the Li family. Only the military power maintained the order. More than 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps were stationed here, fully equipped, which was equivalent to tens of thousands of troops. They would be stationed here for 3 years. As for what troops would come after 3 years, it was something that Li Tianlan should consider. It had nothing to do with Wang Tianzong. It was only 3 years. With Li Tianlan's current momentum, could he really come up with an army that could replace the Snowdance Corps after 3 years if he held Reki City tightly? It's good for young people to be confident. Wang Tianzong said slowly. Li Tianlan quietly waited for Wang Tianzong's but Wang Tianzong, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He did not go on, so he nodded and said, Yes. A part of the Beihai Corps will be stationed in Eastern Europe in the near future, and the garrison area will probably be concentrated in Snow Country. If the Snowdance Corps is under pressure, Marshal Li can temporarily mobilize the Beihai Corps to be stationed in Reki City. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. Li Huaqing frowned and did not speak. The Beihai Corps would be stationed in Snow Country? Snow Country was the world's hegemon. Although their experience was backward, they still maintained the world's top military strength. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, all the superpowers had stayed in Snow Country, but no one was willing to fight in Snow Country. Now the chaos in Eastern Europe was about to end. Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. Take action? Perhaps Snow Country itself did not know that the Beihai Corps was going to be stationed in Snow Country, right? Are you sure? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Yes. Wang Tianzong was calm and simple. It was just one word, but he said it with great confidence. If you need support, just say it, Your Majesty. Although the Snowdance Corps is small, we will not be stingy with support. Wang Tianzong said faintly, Marshal Li, take care of yourself first. Even if there is no war in Wulan State in the future, it will be extremely lively. If you need to borrow troops, just come to me. Li Tianlan sneered and did not speak. Both of you are the pillars of Zhongzhou State. There is no need to make many things so rigid. Zhongzhou State is very big and can accommodate the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, there is also the soil for the development of the Li family. Especially now both of you are outside Zhongzhou State. I hope you two can still make a fool of yourself. I hope you two can still focus on the overall situation. Li Huaqing had a headache. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, if everything was not obvious, the conflict between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had become extremely acute. Li Huaqing came to Reki City this time mainly for the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. But in private he also wanted to coordinate the relationship between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan. The current Sword Emperor and the future East Emperor were the present and the future of Zhongzhou State. In the future the conflict between the two would continue to intensify, which was a good thing for everyone outside Zhongzhou State. But for Zhongzhou State no one wanted to see it. Before Li Huaqing left he received a lot of very important calls including the leaders of the Southeast Group, the Giant Group, and even the senior executives of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were difficult to completely solve, but countless people hoped that Li Huaqing could control the conflict between the two within a certain range. But now, Wang Tianzong was going to attack Snow Country. But his purpose was obviously not just for Snow Country. Once he took down Snow Country and stationed a large number of troops in Snow Country, the Snowdance Corps and the Beihai Corps in Snow Country were bound to have constant conflicts in the future. The positions of the two sides would also make the soldiers of both sides want to annex the other. Just like what the two people said just now, the support seemed very generous. But thinking about it, whether it was the Snowdance Corps or the Beihai Corps, if they encountered problems in Eastern Europe, they would not ask for help from the other side even if they died in battle. It was easy to invite a god in but difficult to send him away. The strength of Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong was not equal. Limited to Eastern Europe, their status was already equal. Once their armies entered each other's territory, if one side insisted on not leaving, the other side really had no good way. Li Huaqing also had no good way. The Wang family of Beihai had its own development path. He could not persuade Wang Tianzong to give up Snow Country, and he was reluctant to do so. But he was also reluctant to let Li Tianlan give up Wulan State. The final result could only be that the Beihai Corps and the Snowdance Corps stayed in Eastern Europe to fight openly and secretly. Now the only thing Li Huaqing could do was to persuade these two chosen one to really take the overall situation into account. The car slowly turned and stopped in the square in front of the office of the president. Li Huaqing got out of the car and suddenly asked, "How is Tribulation's injury?" It was also a big deal. For this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. For any country, the physical condition of an invincible realm expert in its country was a big deal. And his words could be regarded as a reminder to Wang Tianzong. The new commander of the Snowdance Corps recommended by Li Tianlan was Tribulation. Tribulation was no match for Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan were the same. They could not stay in Eastern Europe for a long time. If Wang Tianzong left, no matter who was stationed in Snow Country, they would not be a match for Tribulation. Dijiang might be able to stop Tribulation, but the Border Control Corps was obviously more important. Wang Tianzong would not leave him in Eastern Europe. As long as he left, the Snowdance Corps would obviously have more confidence than the Beihai Corps. Moreover, Tribulation's qualifications and abilities were enough. Even the Southeast Group could not find any reason to object to him replacing Li Tianlan. Martial Uncle's injury is fine. Li Tianlan did not say it clearly. In fact, Tribulation's injury was very serious, but it was not really fatal. Most of his injuries came from the loss of strength caused by his entanglement with Paul. As for other injuries, although they were also serious, he had regained his ability to move. After that, he would recover very quickly. Even if Li Tianlan had to leave in a short time, he could rest assured. In his current state, he is fully competent for the position of commander of the Snowdance Corps. Tribulation is naturally reassuring to be the marshal. Reki City may not be peaceful in the future. There is no clue about Jiang Shangyu's disappearance. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for Marshal Li to leave at this time. Wang Tianzong said blandly. It was also a reminder. Even if the general placed here by the Wang family of Beihai was no match for Tribulation, there was still Jiang Shangyu in the Snowdance Corps. And compared with Gu Xingyun, who was afraid that Li Tianlan had troops in Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong did not want Li Tianlan to go to Tiannan. Otherwise, he would not have hesitated to break through until now. I won't leave until I find Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan said blandly. They slowly walked into the messy office of the president and into the room where Wang Tianzong temporarily lived. Although it's good to talk here, the hotel is better. Tianzong, Tianlan, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. Now that it's over, it's okay to talk it over. Wulan State is fully capable of arranging a residence for Tianzong that is more suitable for his identity. Li Huaqing said with a chuckle, but his eyes were looking at Li Tianlan. On the trial day, the news that he had imprisoned Wang Tianzong had spread throughout Zhongzhou State, which made his prestige soar. Now that the matter was over, he continued to lock Wang Tianzong up. It was meaningless. Sure enough, Li Tianlan nodded and said, "I have no problem with that." "No need." Wang Tianzong laughed. He reached out and poured a cup of tea for Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan respectively. He said slowly, "It's good here. It's quiet and no one will disturb me when I practice calligraphy. I'm very satisfied with it." He paused and said with a smile, "Anyway, I won't live for a long time. I'll stay here." "How long? How long?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. His eyes were a little dignified. Wang Tianzong was about to speak when his cell phone suddenly rang. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was a text message from Summer Solstice. Wang Tianzong looked down at the text message. Quietly, Li Tianlan suddenly noticed that every inch of space around him had become extremely sharp and awe-inspiring. Wang Tianzong seemed to be sharper than before. He glanced at Li Tianlan and said blandly, 3 days, that's enough." Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 557. After coming out of Wang Tianzong's residence, accompanied by Li Tianlan, Li Huaqing visited the Snowdance Corps stationed on the parade square. President Li Huaqing listened carefully to the reports of the 2 deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, and met with Li Zhonghu, Sun Menggran, and other high-level members of the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing discussed the future garrison plan of the Snowdance Corps with the senior management of the Snowdance Corps. He affirmed the achievements of the Snowdance Corps in Eastern Europe this time, wrote down some requirements of the Snowdance Corps about armaments, and said that he would implement them as soon as possible after returning home. Then, accompanied by a group of high-level officials, President Li Huaqing visited the wounded and soldiers of the Snowdance Corps and talked cordially with the representatives of the soldiers. It was not until dusk fell and Rieker came to pick him up that Li Huaqing returned to the Manlisai Hotel where he stayed. Li Tianlan stayed and had dinner in the station. After dinner, Tribulation, who had not recovered from his injury but was breathing more peacefully, made a cup of tea. He looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "What's the matter? Say it." Li Tianlan pondered over the wording. Tribulation was not in a hurry and waited quietly. Since Li Tianlan did not go back with Li Huaqing, he knew that he must have something to do. Is it hard to fight for the position of the Snowdance Corps? That won't happen. Li Tianlan shook his head. There were not many people in Zhongzhou State who could beat Tribulation in terms of qualifications and strength, or even none. Moreover, he had the full support of the giant group. As long as Tribulation nodded, he would become the new and irreplaceable marshal. Wang Tianzong is about to break through. He thought about it and finally decided to tell the truth. His tone was simple and calm as if he was talking about a trivial matter. Tribulation's hand, which was holding the teacup, suddenly shook. The tea spilled on his hand. It was scalding hot, but he didn't seem to feel it. He looked at Li Tianlan with a stunned expression. Wang Tianzong. Breakthrough. When these 2 phrases were put together, it was like a raging wolf, surging and suffocating. Tribulation didn't even know what to say for a moment. The entire dark world knew that Wang Tianzong's realm had completely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But he had been in the invincible realm for many years. After years of accumulation, he took a step forward. Countless people thought that Wang Tianzong was lucky. How long has it been? Was he going to break through again? Could he really break through again after surpassing the peak of the invincible realm? Is he going to break through? With some uncertainty, Tribulation repeated it again. Li Tianlan nodded. Thinking about Wang Tianzong's words, he said in a low voice, "Within 3 days at the earliest and 3 days at the latest." Tribulation's face suddenly became gloomy. Even the time could be determined. This was not a possibility at all, but an absolute certainty. The corner of his mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt lost. The general trend in Reki City had been settled, and so had the general trend in the entire Eastern Europe. But if Wang Tianzong broke through at this time, what did they do before Count 4? Once Wang Tianzong broke through again, he alone would be the general trend of the entire dark world. The whole room seemed to be filled with an extremely oppressive force. Tribulation took a deep breath with difficulty and said dryly, "You broke through after surpassing the half-step invincible realm. What realm is that?" Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and said nothing. In fact, it didn't matter what the realm above the invincible realm was called. What mattered was that in this era where the peak force was only the peak of the invincible realm, Wang Tianzong broke through again and was the real chosen one. Heaven's pride was unparalleled. "Let's call it supreme?" Li Tianlan said with some ridicule. Tribulation glanced at him and suddenly said, "What's Wang Tianzong's plan? He won't touch Reki City for the time being and he can't. But with the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, how can he be willing to get nothing in Eastern Europe? If they let go of Reki City, he will definitely seize other places in Eastern Europe, at least Snow Country." Li Tianlan whispered, "The Beihai core has begun to lurk in Snow Country." Tribulation took a deep breath and asked again, "What about the president?" Li Tianlan's eyes were a little indifferent and he said calmly, "When we were chatting, the president hoped that the Beihai core and the Snowdance core could help each other in Eastern Europe in the future." Tribulation stood up with a sneer, held the teacup in his hand and said in a cold voice, "What does that mean?" Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "It's probably literal." Tribulation took 2 steps back and forth, looked at the wind and rain outside and said slowly, "Is this neutral?" "Yes, it must be neutral." Li Tianlan did not speak. This was a very normal thing. Even a fool knew that once the Beihai core gained a foothold in Snow Country, it would be impossible to coexist peacefully with the Snowdance core. The Snowdance core was now a sharp sword in Li Tianlan's hand. The East Emperor Palace had just started. Sai City had Situt Sangyue, the giant group had Dongqing Wudi, and the Samsara Palace had the Master of Samsara Palace. Forget about the Purgatory of Heaven capital, at least the Li family still had Li Honghe. Only the Snowdance core could be completely affected by Li Tianlan's will and not be shaken at all. Once Wang Tianzong broke through, even if he didn't do it himself, with the influence of the Chosen One in the world, he would let the Beihai core swallow the Snowdance core, which was equivalent to cutting off one of Li Tianlan's arms. In such a matter, it was obvious that Li Huaqing did not give Li Tianlan the support he wanted. Even with Wang Tianzong's breakthrough, the attitude of the academics seemed to have changed. It was hard to say now. Tribulation stopped, looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Tell me your plan." "I want to go north of Sai City," Li Tianlan said without hesitation. Li Tianlan spoke without hesitation. His tone was short, but it carried a touch of absolute sharpness, like an unsheathed sword stained with blood. "Go north?" Tribulation raised his eyebrows. Sai City was in the northernmost part of Zhongzhou State. If they continued north, they would reach Eastern Europe. "Go north." Li Tianlan nodded. This was the first time that he had made a suggestion on the future development of Sai City since he became the young governor of Sai City. Perhaps from this moment on, he had officially integrated into the role of one of the core figures of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan with some seriousness. It was the first time that he had made such a suggestion. Sai City must pay full attention to it. Otherwise, what kind of young governor was Li Tianlan? He sat opposite Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Tell me what you think." "The only force I can think of is Sai City. Only Sai City can completely stabilize the 5 countries in Eastern Europe." Li Tianlan said slowly, "We can't afford to lose the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. They are our most important foundation and bargaining chips in the future. To be honest, I'm afraid." He was really a little afraid. He was afraid of losing everything, of feeling ashamed of the Li family, and of not being able to bear the responsibility he was now carrying. He was afraid of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong, who stood in the position of the Chosen One, put unparalleled pressure on him. With the addition of the Wang family of Beihai, the sense of oppression even made him dare not breathe. Under such circumstances, there was Jiang Shangyu, who was secretive in the Snowdance Corps. According to the current intelligence from Zhongzhou State and Samsara Palace, Jiang Shangyu was likely to have established contact with the Wang family of Beihai. This was normal. Otherwise, he should not have fallen out with Kunlun City in any case. However, in this way the Wang family of Beihai had put another powerful figure in the Snowdance Corps, and he was much more powerful than Qinqing Wan. So Li Tianlan felt that tribulation was not enough here. He wanted to put the whole Sai City in the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. There were several famous assassins in the dark world in Sai City. Their almost peak-level assassination ability could be a deterrent both inside and outside the city. Situt Sangyue, Tribulation, and Qin Shilai were 3 invincible realm experts. When the situation in Wulan State was completely stable, the three of them would unite to open up the passage from Wulan State to Western Europe. The Dark Knights would also exert their strength to show the dark power of Northern Europe and cooperate with the Snowdance Corps. At that time, Raphael would be added, which was equivalent to another invincible realm expert. The Qin clan and Rekvia were deeply rooted. Li Tianlan held Rieker in his hand. In this way Li Tianlan could be completely relieved. With such a force, as long as Wang Tianzong did not take action personally, Sai City could completely cope with the pressure brought by the Wang family of Beihai. It's useless for you to only tell me about this. Tribulation thought for a while and said slowly, I will talk to Auntie in detail tonight. Li Tianlan nodded. In addition, I will also communicate with Minister Dongqing and Secretary Bai. Sai City's overall move to the north involved many aspects. At least, the interest in the northeast could not be given up in vain. Now Sai City seemed to have given up everything in Guangdong and Longjiang province, but they were in charge of Liaodong, and their influence in the entire northeast was unparalleled. Sai City left the northeast and all the things were complicated. Some interests could not be given away in vain. For the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan was one of their own. For Sai City, Li Tianlan was also one of their own. But for the Dongqing clan and Sai City they were just allies. Li Tianlan had to coordinate all the relationships. Only when both sides had a satisfactory answer could Sai City move. Tribulation nodded and said, I personally have no opinion. Then I'll implement it as soon as possible. Li Tianlan stood up. Tribulation nodded and said, I'll arrange a car to take you back. No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. It's windy and rainy. I'm just sober. He walked out of the door and looked at Tribulation. Tribulation stood where he was, his eyes gentle and indifferent. In a trance, Li Tianlan could not remember what this martial uncle looked like when he first met him. But he knew that Tribulation should not be like this. He should be the strongest assassin in the dark world, not the commander stationed in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan's mouth moved and he whispered, Martial uncle, thank you. Tribulation smiled and shook his head. There was no sharpness, no coldness, only calmness. Li Tianlan turned and walked into the wind and rain, feeling complicated. Under the general trend, everyone's fate would change more or less. Now the old general trend had not fallen, and the new general trend was about to change. No one could see clearly what would happen after Wang Tianzong broke through. What Li Tianlan could do was to use the resources he had now to create a relatively favorable situation for himself. He walked quietly in the wind and rain. The wind and rain fell and evaporated silently when they were about to fall on him. All kinds of thoughts began to emerge in his mind. Some were bold, some were unrealistic, some seemed possible, some were pessimistic, and some were depressed. Li Tianlan let his thoughts spread. Walking in the wind and rain he seemed more and more ethereal. The night completely enveloped the world. There seemed to be a light in front. There were some faint noises. A familiar and almost unforgettable fragrance drifted over, faint and faint. Li Tianlan sniffed subconsciously and raised his head in surprise. Qin Weibai was standing in front of him with a smile. Beside her, Flaming Fire was holding an umbrella, expressionless and emotionless. Li Tianlan was a little surprised, but before he had time to speak, an incomparably cheerful and cordial emotion suddenly came over. Colorful rays of light formed in front of him and enveloped his entire body. Li Tianlan's back sank slightly. It was as if a heavy sword had fallen on his back. The feeling was heavy but broad. Li Tianlan didn't feel tired at all. It was a feeling that was almost connected by blood. He and the sword seemed to be a whole. In other words, the sword seemed to be a part of his body. It was so harmonious and harmonious. The colorful light that enveloped him gradually converged and turned into an imperceptible halo. Standing in the halo, Li Tianlan looked calm and quiet, but there was a kind of transcendent elegance about him. Li Tianlan subconsciously reached out his hand. His palm touched a part of the sword hilt. The black hilt looked deep and profound. He finally saw what the sword looked like even though he only saw a part of the hilt. This is, he asked softly, a little confused. Likes you very much. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, This is the sword I mentioned. It can be worthy of your future, the sword that really belongs to the chosen one. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He could feel the vastness and purity of this sword. The Howran sword intent that was enough to tear the sky had no trace, but it was extremely powerful. With this sword in hand, even if Li Tianlan didn't enter the invincible realm, he could be called invincible. If this sword cooperated with him, with his sword intent and the abundant sword energy of this sword, He could completely reproduce the glory on the night of the trial day or even more powerful. In other words, with this sword in Li Tianlan's hand, as long as Wang Tianzong didn't break through, he could fight with Wang Tianzong. Or even fight to the death. Li Tianlan felt the meekness and joy from behind, thinking, is this an opportunity? The sword in the square is a little too much. Li Tianlan thought about something and said subconsciously, no. Qin Weibai blinked and said softly, you deserve everything it gives you. Its master must be the real invincible chosen one and should also be a god in everyone's heart. Strong wind and heavy rain. She seemed to be a little cold and gently wrapped the gray windbreaker around her. Li Tianlan glanced at her. Gray windbreaker, white scarf, white shirt, black straight pants and high heels. Simple with a coolness that did not match the weather in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan took off his marshal's uniform and put it on her. He took the opportunity to hold her body in his arms, bit her pink ear and whispered, thank you. I like this sword very much. The invisible giant sword behind him became more and more excited. Qin Weibai's body was trembling slightly and she murmured, itchy. Li Tianlan kissed her ear again. Qin Weibai let out a soft hum, and her delicate body became softer and softer. She subconsciously wanted to get into his arms. Li Tianlan smiled, suppressed the charming thoughts in his heart and whispered, you're not leaving this time, are you? Qin Weibai was silent in his arms for a while and whispered, tomorrow I'm going to Mormon's. Li Tianlan frowned. As if afraid that he would be angry, Qin Weibai put her arms around his neck and whispered, I'll accompany you tonight. You can do whatever you want. After a pause, her perfect and flawless face blushed, but she was still cold. She said in a soft voice, as many times as you want. Li Tianlan's breathing suddenly quickened, and his hand holding Qin Weibai also slightly tightened. Boss, it's time to go up. The palace master is still waiting for you. Flaming Fire suddenly said. Her voice was extremely cold, like the frozen ice in the polar region. Li Tianlan glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire was also looking at him. There was a strange glint in her eyes. Yes, let's go and find my sister. Qin Weibai gently pushed Li Tianlan and said softly. The palace master is here? Li Tianlan was stunned. Since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace had been closely related to him. He had met many high-level supermasters of the Samsara Palace, and the one who had been in touch with him was Qin Weibai. But he had only seen the master of the Samsara Palace once in a video. If she was in Eastern Europe, this would be the first time Li Tianlan met her. Li Tianlan felt a little complicated. It's in a nearby hotel. Let's go. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan into a black car on the side of the road. Li Tianlan glanced at the Manlisai Hotel in front of him through the window and did not speak. Qin Weibai sat next to him and held his hand in an extremely gentle manner. The clothes don't suit you very well. Li Tianlan suddenly said, they look old. As soon as the words came out, he was stunned. In his mind, Qin Weibai had always been truly flawless. There was no such thing as fitting clothes. Any clothes she wore were a real scenery. In all fairness, Qin Weibai could still be said to be devastatingly beautiful in a gray windbreaker. But this color made her look too mature. Li Tianlan always felt that it was a little strange. He didn't even know why he was so harsh on her. Really? Qin Weibai looked down at her clothes and whispered, then I won't wear it anymore. She took off the windbreaker and put it on the seat. She hesitated and leaned into Li Tianlan's arms. It looks much better this way. Li Tianlan lowered his head and praised. Qin Weibai looked at where his eyes fell and gently rolled her eyes at him. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, you're so annoying. Li Tianlan wrapped his arms around her waist and whispered, what's the matter with Mormons? Just some small things. It'll be solved soon. Qin Weibai leaned into his arms and felt his heartbeat. Her eyes were a little dazed and she whispered, when Mormons' matter is solved, I'll go to Tianan with you, okay? I'll leave Samsara Palace and stay with you all day. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I can give birth to a child for you. And Rushi and Yueto. Her bright eyes gradually became blurred and full of longing. Li Tianlan's expression also softened and he whispered, okay, when it's over, I'll take you to Tianan. He paused and whispered, it'll be over soon. The colorful flowing light gradually flowed behind him and flowed to his arm. It gradually slid down and covered his whole palm. The light gradually condensed and finally turned into a pair of black gloves on Li Tianlan's palm. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he felt a little helpless. His palm was gradually moving up and was about to touch the warm and proud peaks, but there was a glove on his palm. The glove was really thick. Li Tianlan looked at the glove thoughtfully. It seemed to feel Li Tianlan's mood. The light on the glove flickered with some grievance, and then it turned into a black ring again. Li Tianlan stroked his palm with satisfaction and said with a smile, "What's the name of this sword?" Qin Weibai's body slightly stiffened, and she subconsciously glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire drove the car attentively, holding the steering wheel tightly. Qin Weibai moved her body and whispered, "It doesn't matter what it was called before. Now it's your sword and it's better for you to give it a name." Name. Flaming Fire, who was driving, suddenly said, "Does a name mean anything?" Li Tianlan looked at her in surprise and said, "What do you mean?" Flaming Fire was silent for a while, and then said indifferently, "It means nothing." She drove the car and said no more. A long time ago, when she first followed Qin Weibai, she realized the truth. But it was not until today that she completely understood it. The so-called name, the so-called identity. Yours, mine, hers, and its. No matter what the name was. It was meaningless. Chapter 558. The three-star hotel where the master of Samsara Palace stayed was not big. The only advantage was that it was close to the Manlisai Hotel, so it was very convenient to travel. After parking the car in front of the extremely exquisite hotel, Flaming Fire finally said, "Here we are." "You're not getting off?" Li Tianlan asked. "I still have something to do." Flaming Fire sat motionless in the car and said calmly. Subconsciously, Li Tianlan felt a little strange, but for a moment he could not tell what was wrong. Before he could figure it out, Qin Weibai had already gently held his hand. Li Tianlan smiled, got out of the car and walked into the hotel with Qin Weibai. When they were about to enter the door, he looked back. Flaming Fire's black car was approaching a crossroads ahead. Li Tianlan was deep in thought. In the end, he followed Qin Weibai into the hotel. The top floor, the only luxurious suite. The mysterious master of Samsara Palace lived here. For Li Tianlan, it was hard for him to describe the position of the master of Samsara Palace in his heart. It was a kind of estrangement that he had never really met, but there was a closeness between them. There was also gratitude as if he had been reborn and some vague respect. All the emotions gathered together and became extremely complicated. Samsara Palace Master, Qin Weibai, and even the 12 Super Masters. Everyone had done a lot for him. There were some things that Li Tianlan already knew, some he didn't know, and some he had already noticed. It seemed that since he entered the secular world, the Samsara Palace, which had been mysterious and low-key, had actually been revolving around him. There was Qin Weibai's deep love for him, and naturally, there was also the laissez-faire attitude of the master of Samsara Palace when she was silent. This favor was so heavy that Li Tianlan even felt a little scared and ashamed to accept it. The elevator was going up slowly. Li Tianlan carefully tidied up his clothes and suppressed all the thoughts in his mind. He could feel the extremely strong heartbeat in his body. The huge vitality of the immortality potion was still working. This immortality came from the master of Samsara Palace. A dark green jade pendant on his neck trembled slightly as the elevator went up. That was the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, which also came from the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's thoughts became more and more complicated. Qin Weibai had rushed to his side like a moth to a flame, and then the whole Samsara Palace had spared no effort to support him. Would there be an answer to all of this today? The elevator stopped and the metal doors parted. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and led Qin Weibai out of the elevator. The door to the luxurious suite was open, and it was quiet inside. Qin Weibai stood in front of the door and knocked. "Come in." A calm and wooden voice rang out in the room. Qin Weibai walked in first and pulled Li Tianlan to the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room were huge. In his line of sight, a tall and plump figure was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, quietly watching the scenery outside. There was no TV on in the living room, no lights, no air conditioner, no tea, and no paintings. There was only the woman sitting in front of the window and the wind and rain outside. In the past. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. For a long time, this place seemed to have been deathly silent and dull. Qin Weibai lightened her steps and said softly, "Sister, Tianlan is here." Li Tianlan stared blankly at the black figure in his sight, bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Palace Master." Qin Weibai quietly pinched Li Tianlan, her eyes filled with hidden bitterness. Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment before he realized that he had said something wrong. He coughed and said with slight embarrassment, "Sister." The master of Samsara Palace turned her head and glanced at him. There was darkness between them, but their eyes were extremely bright. Qin Weibai walked aside and turned on the light in the living room. The master of Samsara Palace's expression was calm. She nodded slightly and said, "Sit down." Li Tianlan sat down and didn't know what to say for a moment. "You have something on your mind?" The master of Samsara Palace suddenly said softly. Li Tianlan glanced at her and was a little stunned. Although she was a little plump, the outline of her face was extremely soft, and he could vaguely see the delicacy she used to have. Li Tianlan didn't even dare to guess the age of such a master of Samsara Palace. It was possible that she was 30, 40, or 50. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "I'm a little nervous seeing you for the first time." "It's not this." The master of Samsara Palace looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said softly. Her eyes were so light that Li Tianlan couldn't see any emotion at all. It seemed that all emotions were merged together and the strongest was calmness. "You have something on your mind." She repeated her words. Qin Weibai brought a cup of tea to Li Tianlan and sat beside him. She looked at him strangely. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "It's a small matter." "The chosen one in the dark world is not a small matter," the master of Samsara Palace said softly in a self-mocking voice. Li Tianlan's hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He raised his head and said, "You know all about it?" The master of Samsara Palace sat by the French window and said softly with a faint sense of loss in her voice, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." She looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Li Tianlan answered simply, but he was thinking about the words of the master of Samsara Palace. He had been waiting for this day for a long time? He was waiting for Wang Tianzong's breakthrough? He was a little uncertain and said directly, "If there is no accident, Wang Tianzong will break through in 3 days. He is now ready and can step over that threshold at any time." "I'm afraid you're right." The master of Samsara Palace had no reaction to Wang Tianzong's news. She just said softly, "What I don't want to hear the most is that you're not afraid. He is the chosen one, invincible in the world. Anyone in front of him should feel afraid. This is a respect for invincibility in martial arts as well as for oneself. Tianlan, in your current position the most important thing is to be calm and rational. Passion and impulse are the most useless things. I don't know if I will have the chance to say these words to you in the future. It's rare for us to meet, so I'll just say it all at once." She stood up and sat on the sofa opposite Li Tianlan. She said softly, "As a person in a high position, you can't easily talk about life and death. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." After a pause she continued, "People are most likely to let themselves down." She glanced at Qin Weibai intentionally or unintentionally and continued, "I've experienced a lot in my life, and all of them are not difficult for me. Do you know what's the most difficult thing?" "What?" Li Tianlan asked. "Being yourself." The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, "This is the most difficult thing." Li Tianlan thought of a lot in an instant. He knew too little about the master of Samsara Palace, but he also knew a few major things she had done in recent years. As a person in a high position she couldn't easily talk about life and death. What was she thinking when the Samsara Palace destroyed the headquarters of Night Spirit more than 3 years ago, and the master of Samsara Palace forcibly took the murderous weapon against Blue Sky Underworld? What was she thinking when he was seriously injured more than 3 years ago, and the master of Samsara Palace led the 12 super masters straight into Mount Dibing and pulled out their swords to face Wang Tianzong? What was she thinking when the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, the master of Samsara Palace challenged Gu Xingyun? What was she when the headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed by Wang Tianzong's sword a few months ago? In retrospect, everything the master of Samsara Palace had done seemed to be related to him. "What about you?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He looked straight into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace. "Have you ever let yourself down?" "I don't know." The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were blank for a moment, and she said softly, "I've done a lot of things that can't be evaluated. So being yourself is the most difficult thing, and not letting yourself down is the most difficult thing." Li Tianlan's heart trembled for no reason. He lowered his head and drank his tea in silence. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her hand. Li Tianlan's fingers loosened slightly. A colorful light lit up in the palm of the master of Samsara Palace. "I'm not surprised that Wang Tianzong will break through. But now it seems that this is not something you should face. I will block the Sword Emperor in this state for you. So, don't be afraid and don't worry about anything. The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, I want to borrow this sword. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said softly, that's the chosen one. I told you that my sister also has a sword, Qin Weibai suddenly said. She has been preparing for this sword for a long time. Although it is only the power of one sword, it can reproduce the peak state of the chosen one. No matter how much preparation a person at the peak of the invincible realm prepares, he can't reach this level. Li Tianlan said quietly. So this sword is the key. The master of Samsara Palace said quietly, this is the sword of the chosen one. Its owner used to be the chosen one, so this sword naturally has the sword intent and sword energy of the chosen one. I will arrange for people to form a sword formation created by the chosen one and urge the remaining sword intent of this sword to the extreme. This is not enough. Li Tianlan said, if this sword has the power of the chosen one when it is urged to the extreme, then the so-called chosen one is too worthless. It's not enough, but it's not far from it. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him and said, I will make up for the lack. It's enough for me to exchange all my martial arts for one sword. One person for one sword. Li Tianlan suddenly stood up and said, no. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.